At the beginning of the story, an old man offers the main character a chance to press a button which would allow him to train for 100 million years in a different dimension. At first the main character did not believe it, but he thought of doing it just to make the old man stop his delusional rumbling. But as he did so, he realized that he made a huge mistake. For some context leading up to this moment, we see the main character training in the school grounds of the prestigious Swordcraft Academy. As he was doing so, a few bullies noticed him and decided to tease him for being a rejected swordsman. They proceed to harass him and kick him out, telling him he is not worthy of training there. Alan Rodall, the main character, has always loved swordcraft, but he never had any talent for it, hence why the nickname of a reject swordsman. When he was a kid, his mother was very supportive of his dream. She worked hard and saved money to enroll him into this prestigious academy. They were so poor that at one point, she would have to cut money from her own food to save for him, which is why Alan wants to make it up to her and repay her for everything she has done for him. So, Alan goes to the secluded hallway to practice his sword swings. As he gets going, a popular guy shows up with two girls, and once again, starts insulting Alan for his incompetence. Alan recognizes this guy as Dodriel Barton, a prodigy. Dodriel tells Alan that he should probably stop doing swing repetitions, as they are not going to help him. Instead, he should probably quit the academy and get a job to do himself and his parents a favor. Alan, as always, tries to not pay much attention to what he says and goes back to his training. However, this time the guy takes it one step further and says that he feels bad for his parents, who gave birth to such an untalented kid. But he really crosses the line when he says that Alan's parents must be just as useless as him for them to give birth to him. Angered, Alan immediately asks him to take back his word. He exclaims how his mother is a strong woman who raised him by herself and gave him the best possible life she could. Hearing this, Dodriel says that it makes him feel even worse for her, because it indicates that she didn't hold back in trying to give him the best upbringing, but unfortunately, one's offspring can only be trash if they are trash themselves. This was the final straw for Alan, who immediately charged at Dodriel with his sword, looking to attack him. However, Dodriel isn't even bothered in the slightest by this, and easily stops Alan with a well-placed kick to the gut. Alan is knocked down and left gasping for breath, as Dodriel makes fun of him for not being able to dodge such a basic kick. Alan then proceeds to challenge Dodriel to a proper duel, and says that if he wins the duel, Dodriel would have to apologize and take his words back. Dodriel likes the idea, and says that he will go on his knees and eat his words if he loses. But if Alan loses, he needs to leave the academy. Alan is baffled by this, but Dodriel thinks it is only fair to have equal stakes on both sides. Alan doesn't think the stakes are equal, but Dodriel tells him that him leaving the academy will be inconsequential, because he is inconsequential himself. This hits Alan hard, who then spends the bulk of his time training, doing sword swings. He doesn't go to coaching academies, so training is all he could do. However, Dodriel is a much stronger opponent who can even defeat upperclassmen. This makes him question himself, but he decides to ignore it and keep practicing. After a while, the sword slips out of his hands, and this breaks Alan. No matter how much he was trying, he wasn't getting any good at it. Just then, an old man approaches Alan and asks him what is wrong. He tells him that sharing a problem with someone can make him feel better. Alan thinks it makes sense and tells the man about the whole thing in detail. The old man then tells Alan that he can actually help him. The man then proceeds to show him a button, which would send him to a different dimension to train for 100 million years. The dimension will give him a nice house and all the equipment. He will also get access to whatever food he wants to get stronger. However, Alan doesn't pay attention to him and goes back to training. The old man keeps persuading him to press the button. At one point, he emotionally blackmails him into pushing it for the old man, who doesn't have much long to live. So, to shut the man up, Alan decides to press the button. However, it is only later that he will realize how much of a mistake that was. After pressing the button, he is immediately transferred to another dimension. At first, he was shocked and left wondering if it was true. But it was really a different dimension, as there was no sun, no shadows, yet it was bright outside. He also felt happy knowing he has 100 million years to train, because that will definitely be enough to outdo Dodriel. He starts training, and after a while, realizes that a lot of time has passed. So he goes inside the house he was given, and was left shocked by how big it was, and it was all for him to use. He eats some fresh fruits from the magic pantry inside, before going to the extra large tub to take a bath. After that, he sleeps on his comfy bed, vowing to become a top swordsman during his time here. 10 years later, he has now become quite good at swordcraft, and finally got the hang of how things work. He can now put pressure, and use each of his body parts appropriately to add to his skills. His swordsmanship was becoming optimized. 100 years later, he was now beginning to develop his own moves, and he felt like an institution within himself through the years of training. 1,000 years later, training was still going good, but he wasn't feeling very well on a personal level. He started to think about how his mom was doing, and felt loneliness for the first time there. 2,000 years later, he started to lose his sense of taste, as all food, no matter how good, tasted the same, and it was unbearable. 5,000 years later, he started questioning himself if all this hard work is for nothing, and if all of this is a dream. All the doubts crept in, but he somehow stopped himself from getting drowned by them. 7,000 years later, his mental pressure was at peak. He wondered why he was even doing this in the first place. What was the reason? And it all made him want to quit swordsmanship as a whole. However, he stopped himself as he remembered the ugly words of Dodriel Barton, so he knows that he needs to get stronger and beat him. 10,000 years later, he had now developed a special technique, which let him fight himself. He trained very hard in those inconclusive battles, making him stronger. Yet he felt he wasn't doing enough to get better than Dodriel, who is a prodigy. He uses the Autumn Rain School of Swordsmanship, a very popular and well sought out technique, and Dodriel is one of the best at it. So, he wanted to learn something special before his time ran out. As he kept training and training, eventually the time ran out. Alan was left with a dissatisfactory taste though, as he felt that he didn't develop that special something he needed to beat Dodriel. Just like that, Alan was back in his world, the same time, the same night. The old man asks Alan if he enjoyed training for 100 million years inside the dimension, to which Alan said he isn't sure. The old man tells him that he needs not to worry, as the stuff he learned there will translate well into this real world as well. So he asks Alan to take a few swings of his swords. Alan obliges, and upon touching the sword, he feels like he has a deeper connection to it now than before. He brings it out and takes a swing. It was so quick and so powerful that it caused a huge blow of wind to come and go. Excited, Alan felt good, but he still wasn't sure if he could beat Dodriel. After all, the Autumn Rain style is a competent style, developed over lifetimes. So, Dodriel has a lot of special moves and he has no significant ones, which is why he asks the old man if he can press the button again and train for another 100 million years. The old man tells him he can press it as many times as he wishes to. Alan hears this and presses it again, going off to that dimension. After 100 million more years, he comes back and dozes off. Once he is up, he wonders what year, date, and time it was, but he is greeted by Miss Paula, the woman who takes care of him. She asked him what he was doing sleeping outside, to which Alan says he forgot and had a dream. Following this, she asks him to come inside and eat breakfast. Alan obliges, as he wonders if what he saw was just a dream. This is when he sees the million-year training button, but brushes it off as nothing and a part of his dream. Later, as he is eating breakfast, Miss Paula says that it is quite late, and wonders if he will reach school in time. Alan remembers that his duel with Alan is at 9 a.m., so he immediately runs off to school, knowing he will definitely be late. So, when he arrives at school, he apologizes to the receptionist for being late. But the receptionist tells him that he is in fact early, and that it is only 8 a.m. This was quite strange for Alan, but he was willing to accept it and move forward. After a while, he makes his way to the battle arena gate, as he was about to step into a huge duel. However, Alan is stunned when he sees a huge crowd inside the arena, calling him stuff and telling Dodriel to whoop him. Dodriel praises Alan for bothering to show up, as he didn't even expect that much from him. Overwhelmed by the rabid crowd, Alan asked Dodriel why there was a crowd in the first place. Cunning as always, Dodriel says that it must have been because the rumors of their fight had gotten out. Alan knows full well that it was Dodriel himself who did this. After this, A teacher came in to officiate the duel, and Alan was looking to complain to him about the crowd creating an unfair environment. But the teacher didn't even listen and told them to get ready for the fight. Dodriel promises to torment Alan until he begs for mercy, while Alan tells him to not take him lightly. However, deep down, Alan felt scared because he knows that he is no match for Dodriel. However, he can't back down now and must fight him like a man. So, Alan musters up the courage, and he is surrounded by a whole different aura. The aura was so powerful that it startled Dodriel, who asked Alan what he was up to. Alan was confused, as he was expecting Dodriel to attack. The crowd were also pushing Dodriel to knock Alan out, so he moved forward to attack. However, Alan saw his movements in slow motion. It made him wonder if Dodriel was doing this on purpose to mock him. Alan easily dodges the attacks that Dodriel charged in with. This left Dodriel shocked, as he didn't expect this. However, he vows to finish it all with his next attack, which is going to be 3 times faster. Dodriel leads in again, but Alan only feels like the attack was slightly quicker but still slow. Annoyed, he snaps and attacks Dodriel for disrespecting him as an opponent. However, the strike from Alan was so powerful that it sent Dodriel flying back meters. Alan was shocked, as his singular strike had registered as 7 slashes, and the referee declared him the victor. This was shocking, but Alan finally realized that the millions of years of training he endured wasn't just a dream. A few days after the duel with Dodriel, Alan was once again training, and things have changed for sure. People saw him training, but now they were referring to him as a cheater, but didn't want to mess with him. The bullying had gotten worse, as people were accusing him of using dirty tricks to beat Dodriel for some reason. Some of them even throw a bottle at him, but Alan easily deflects it back at them. Now, he is strong enough to deal with any physical bullying. However, they've been bad-mouthing him a lot behind his back. Alan thinks the him from several hundred million of years ago would definitely be bothered by this, but the current him is not. As he makes his way out of the academy, he sees a mother-son duo, which reminds him of his own mother. After all, his mother raised him alone after his father passed away in an epidemic. He misses her, so decides to go see her when he has a break. He also plans on buying her some gifts, as going empty-handed would look bad. However, upon checking his wallet, he realizes that he barely has any money. So he decides to get a part-time job. At home, Miss Paula says that she has exactly what he is looking for, a gig that will earn him money. She gives him an invitational leaflet to the swordsmanship tournament that is to be held in Orvis City. It is an elite tournament, and prizes are really worth it. She thinks that a man should earn through his strength, and that Alan will do well here. Alan is a bit overwhelmed, but he thinks that he will at least be able to perform well and get some money, even if winning is out of the question. But the catch was that the entry fee for the tournament was $1,000. Miss Paula tells him to rest assured, as she is willing to help him out and let him put on a fight. Alan thanks her for the help, to which Miss Paula tells him to pay her back with a brilliant showing in the tournament. Alan promises to win some prize for her at the tournament. On the day of the tournament, a nervous Alan arrives at Orvis City, and his nervousness is turned up a notch when he meets the other participants of the tournament. They're all giants who look like they're pissed off. He understands that there is a huge power gap. One of them starts picking on Alan, calling him a brat, and mocking him for bringing a sword to the event and wanting to potentially join. Others mock him by saying there is no way such a scrawny kid would be looking to join the tournament. Alan was understandably annoyed by this, but it pisses off the giant even more, who asks Alan if he is showing defiance. Alan wanted to respond properly, but he understands that causing a ruckus outside would cause him to get disqualified from the tournament, and he doesn't want to make Miss Paula disappointed in him. So he just apologizes promptly and moves away. Alan then goes over to the registration booth. There, the girl handling the business asks for his name and the school of swordsmanship he practices. Alan tells his name to her, but he didn't really have a school, so he just told her that he is self-trained. This draws out laughter from the girl, but she registers him anyway. Alan feels bad because he knows that only losers aren't let into specific style schools. Despite this, he goes inside the waiting room, wanting to get a few swings in to warm up. Just then, Alan sees a pretty girl with a sword pass him by. Alan was impressed by her beauty and wondered if the girl would participate as well. Meanwhile, a popular woman arrives at the venue in disguise to watch the tournament. But she is recognized by a guard and subsequently taken for special treatment. After this, the mayor of Orvis is brought on stage to deliver a speech. He thanks everyone for participating, but he keeps the formalities short and hypes up the crowd and participants with a violent speech, wanting to see people beating each other's brains out. After this, the mayor attends to the woman from earlier, Rhea Lasnote, the chairwoman of the Thousand Blade School of Swordsmanship. It is one of the 5 elite schools of swordscraft, and he apologizes to her for not giving her the proper care. Rhea, who doesn't like attention, tells him that he didn't need to prepare a makeshift VIP seat for him, but he apologizes further for not giving her better care. But it is expected in her position, as the 5 elite schools of swordcraft do hold a lot of influence, and she is a chairwoman of one of them. But she still tells the mayor to not go overboard, as she is only here to spectate. The mayor guesses she is here to watch last year's winner, the bounty hunter, Rose Valencia. It is the girl Alan saw earlier, and Rhea is here to scout her. She is also hopeful of finding a few diamonds in the rough. Following this, Fina, the swordscraft idol, comes out as the host and announces the rules of the tournament. 1 versus 1 duels. The only way to win is through incapacitating one's opponent or knocking them out of bounds. Fatal attacks are prohibited, and breaking this rule would result in immediate disqualification. Alan hears this and thinks the rules are quite straightforward. Fina then draws the first duel of the tournament. The names she draws are of Babel Domingo and Alan Rodal. It's the guy Alan had an altercation with earlier, and Alan wasn't pleased by that. He had hoped to wait a few more rounds before fighting, while Babel is shocked that the skinny kid from earlier is in the tournament for real. Fina then announces details about the two. Babel follows the style of Vajra, one of the 5 elite schools, and is known to devastate his opponents with his sword. Meanwhile, Alan is self-taught. This makes the arena erupt in laughter. They envy Babel for getting such an easy draw, while Babel thinks that fighting a kid who is self-taught is like bullying. Alan gets pissed off, but he can't deny that they're telling the truth. He might have improved, but that's only compared to his much weaker academy. Despite this, it is an opportunity to fight a stronger person, so he wants to make use of it. Fina then announces the start of the duel. They both get ready. Alan, ready to check out his training from the different dimensions, decides to attack first. He uses a skill he calls the Flying Shadow and sees how Babel reacts. However, the strike causes a gust of wind to fly straight at Babel and knock him out of bounds. This shocks everyone, including Rhea Lasnote. Meanwhile, Rose Valencia watched in amusement. Just like that, Alan had shocked everyone and picked up a monumental victory. He himself didn't know how it happened, as his intentions were to only keep Babel in check. He understands that maybe he has indeed gotten a lot stronger than he thought. This was only the beginning, as he also went on to dominate his next opponents, amassing a ridiculous 5 victories in a row. It all led to the most anticipated bout of the tournament, the final. On one side, it was the reigning champion, Rose Valencia. She is known as the sole inheritor of the secret swordcraft school of Cherry Blossom. She sent through all the rounds without even getting a scratch. Her opponent was Alan, who had now won over everyone in the crowd, and despite being self-taught, his skills and confidence made it clear that the match was going to be competitive. Alan was a bit flustered to have the crowd behind him for once, but he immediately switched to serious mode. He heard of Rose Valencia before. She is a well-known master of the swordcraft, who has won several tournaments. She is also known for taking down criminals with bounties on their heads. However, he can't help but look at her body, as her outfit was quite revealing. Despite this, he focuses on the fact that she has used a counterattacking style up until now. So, he knows that he can't attack without giving thought. Just like that, the final match begins. Both combatants square up each other, waiting for the other to make a move. Suddenly, Rose fires off with a sudden attack on Alan, who is shocked by how quick she is. But it isn't enough to take him down, so he easily blocks her attack. Alan then finds an opening in her defense and tries to exploit that. His strike is only narrowly avoided by Rose, who then, from a compromising position, hits a special move out of nowhere. Startled, Alan still manages to block, but is a bit shaken up by her prowess. The battle then continues on, but as time passes, the crowd starts to notice that Alan is making Rose look like an amateur, tiring her out with ease. Tired, Rose eventually takes a breather and asks Alan where he learned swordcraft from. Alan, embarrassed, says that he is truly self-taught. However, Rose doesn't believe him, as his skills look like they've been developed over generations. Alan understands that, as he did spam the 100 million year button that night and racked up over 1 billion years worth of training. Rose then says that with her next blow, this match will be over. She then prepares and launches a special move of the cherry blossom style, an 8-sided slash. The strike is indeed powerful, and Rose is convinced that she has won. However, this wasn't something Alan was afraid of. He analyzes that there were gaps between her 8 strikes, so to block it, he uses his own 8-slash attack, which has no gaps. Using that, he easily blocks her, and with her guard open, he lands a decisive slash on her. This drops Rose and the match ends. Against all odds, Alan Rodal, a self-taught 15-year-old boy, is declared the winner of the sword fighting tournament. After the win, even the giants who picked on him before the tournament started accepted that he was great. So they started throwing Alan up in the air to celebrate. A few days after his monumental victory, Alan was called into the principal's office. Alan thought it had to do with the rumors that he used an illegal skill or weapon to beat Dodriel, but when he walked in, the principal was smiling. He told Alan to sit down and even offered him sweets. Confused, Alan asks the teacher why he was called there. The principal tells him that he has made the school proud by getting a scholarship invitation from the Thousand Blades Academy. He doesn't know why they offered Alan a scholarship, but for a small academy like them to send a student to one of the 5 elite schools is an achievement by itself. The homeroom teacher chimes in, saying he had always believed that Alan would make it big, and offered him to deliver a speech at the graduation ceremony. Alan saw their hypocrite sides, as these were the same people who had once refused to listen to his reports of being bullied. But now that he has been offered a scholarship by Thousand Blades, they are treating him like a hero. After this, Alan tells them that he needs time to think about making a decision before he actually does so. This stuns the teachers, as they ask him if he has gone crazy, because there is nothing to think about something that is obvious. However, Alan makes it clear that he has thought about becoming a holy knight or a witchblade, so this is something he needs time to think about, and will only make a decision once he consults his mother. They kept pestering him to take the offer right away, but Alan stood firm on his call. After this, Alan goes home and packs up to leave. He says bye to Ms. Paula before going back to his village. He runs through the forests for 3 hours straight, and with his newly gained strength and stamina, he reaches his village with relative ease. Once there, he is recognized by his village folk, who tell him that he has gotten a lot bigger. After this, Alan goes back home, where his mother is surprised to see him, and they embrace. She immediately goes to prepare dinner for him, while Alan decides to help her out. As they prepared dinner, Alan caught up with her and told her about everything from his school life to winning the swordcraft tournament. However, he still didn't tell her about the Thousand Blades scholarship, so he decides to tell her that next. Alan tells her about it and asks whether he should pick that, become a holy knight or a witchblade. His mother thinks that it is not at all a hard decision, because she knows he wants to go to Thousand Blades. Alan is shocked by this, but his mother says that she just used her mother's intuition. It isn't very hard to guess because he liked swordcraft since he was a little kid. She tells him to do as he wants and live his life without worrying about her. As his mother, she only wants him to be happy and live a longer and better life than her. After they have an emotional moment together, Alan's mother tells him to dig in, because she made his favorite stew for him. Excited, Alan goes to take a bath, and his mother, back to the kitchen. However, the old man, who gave Alan the 100 million year button, was eating in Alan's stead. Alan's mother notices his aura, and quickly deduces that the spell she put on has faded, so the time hermit has appeared. Meanwhile, Alan was enjoying his bath, but he also noticed that his mother has aged up a lot, so he needs to be quick and become a great swordsman. Outside, the time hermit was talking about how Alan's mother hid the spell well, and that finding it made his old bones work harder. Angered, Alan's mother attacks the old man, promising to break some of his old bones. However, the old man manages to disappear in thin air before she could do anything. The noise made during this alerted their neighbor, who came in looking for the time hermit. Alan's mother informs the guy that the time hermit had left. The guy says that him appearing means that the protective spell that she put on Alan has disappeared. Alan's mother thinks the million-year button has been used for him to appear again. The neighbor wonders how the time hermit found Alan to begin with. Alan's mother thinks that the time hermit has something against them, so he is trying to get on their way. However, she vows to not allow him to do what he wants this time. The next morning, Alan departs from his village back to Ms. Paula's dorm. A few days later, Alan had to go to the Thousand Blades Academy for an interview. Despite getting a scholarship, he had to pass through an interview. Even though it was a bit awkward, Alan thought he did just enough. And his teacher did tell him that he has never heard of anyone failing an interview there. So on the day of his result, Alan was mailed by the academy, telling him that he had passed. This was a moment of celebration for him. He informed this to Ms. Paula, who was also very happy for him, and decided to throw a huge feast to commemorate his admission. Alan also made sure to write a letter to his mother to tell her about it. After a while, he got ready to leave for the Thousand Blades Academy, and before going there, he bid farewell to Ms. Paula. He explained how he is eternally grateful to her for letting him stay when he didn't have any money. She woke him up in the morning to go to school, made delicious food for him, financially helped him, and gave him the best advice. So he thanked her for everything. This made Ms. Paula tear up a little. After this, Ms. Paula tells him that she doesn't care how big the academy is, he needs to go there and conquer that. So with that, Alan went off to his new destination. He ran through the farm roads and eventually arrived at the capital city, Orist. Once there, he goes to the Thousand Blades dormitory, and he is shocked by just how big his room is. He then puts on the school uniform, and he can't help but admire how beautiful it is. He particularly likes the look of the shoulder crests the most. Following this, he takes his sword and gets ready to go to the academy for the first time, marking the beginning of his new life. As Alan walks to school, he runs into other students of the academy. They're new students just like him. Just then, he overhears a few students talking about the scholarship students and how they don't like them. After all, these students got to skip the tough entrance exams to get a direct entry. Alan understands that he will be in for a lot of bullying if his status is to be revealed, so he decides to keep his mouth shut and tell no one that he is a scholar student. He arrives at the academy and sits down for the yearly address of the new students. He hopes everything goes well, because he doesn't want to go through the hell he went through at his previous school. This is when Rhea Lasnote, the chairwoman, asks for the 3 scholarship students, Leah Visteria, Rose Valencia, and Alan Rodal, to step onto the stage. Alan feels deflated for being revealed like this. He hoped to have a normal and peaceful school life, but now his secret has been revealed, and he needs to come to everyone's attention. With his head down, he begins walking, to which Rose Valencia spots him and greets him. He is shocked to see Rose there, and asks her what she is doing. Rose tells him to first get on stage, and that they will talk later. The 3 scholarship students then step forward, as the chairwoman goes on about how the scholarship system is new, and that these students were handpicked by her, and that they are all great swordsmen. She then asks the students to introduce themselves. Beginning with Leah Visteria, she says that she is an exchange student from the Visteria Kingdom, and she practices the hegemonic style of swordcraft. Despite being royalty, she says that she is just another student here. Everyone is taken aback by the fact that such a talented princess was among the students. Following this, it was Rose Valencia's turn. She keeps it short and sweet as she states her name and tells them that she practices the cherry blossom style. Following this, it was Alan's turn, and he was a nervous wreck. He somehow shuddered his way into saying his name and that he comes from the Grand Swordcraft Academy. As for the style he follows, he reluctantly reveals that he is self-trained. This deflates everyone, as they start questioning how he got a scholarship. They start making fun of him and accuse him of bribery to get in here. The chairwoman was having a normal conversation with the scholarship students when Alan just ran off in humiliation. He could no longer handle it, as he blamed the chairwoman for sabotaging his debut. He was afraid of it being another instance of a bullying-filled school life. So, he makes his way to a secluded area and starts swinging his sword. However, he notices that he isn't feeling it. He trains for a while, but feels like today isn't the day for him, so he decides to wrap it up in the evening. Before going, he wanted to check out the bathhouse. He thinks that a proper bath could help make him feel good after quite a bad day. However, when he opens the door to the bathhouse, he sees Leah Wisteria in her underwear. Alan immediately closes the door and gets flustered, as he wondered what Leah was doing in the men's bathhouse. Leah then breaks open the door and smashes the wall in anger, as she challenges Alan to a duel. Alan is baffled, but he doesn't mind a duel. So he asks her for the stakes. Leah suggests that the loser of the duel must become the slave of the winner. Alan thinks that is too extreme and decides to apologize for seeing her in her undies, but this angers her even more. Eventually, Alan accepts to have the duel. Out of nowhere, Rhea Lasnote walks out, saying that she had heard everything that was said, so she is willing to be the referee during this duel of theirs. She wastes no time and drags them both to the duel arena for a showdown. As they both get ready for the battle, Leah brings out the black and white dragon of flames, Fafnir. She is surrounded by the flames of this dragon, as Alan is left dumbstruck. What Leah was using is called a soul attire, a special layer of aura that covers the swordsman and gives them extra power. It is something that only the greatest of talents can get through sheer hard work. Leah sees him standing there and tells him to activate his soul attire too. Alan tells her that he actually doesn't have a soul attire, which makes Leah laugh out loud. She couldn't believe that she was in a battle with a kid who doesn't even have a soul attire. However, she isn't one to hold back, so she activates her powers fully. Seeing this, Alan is overwhelmed. He comes to realize that contrasting to her elegant image, Leah is quite the monster on the battlefield. However, Alan doesn't know how to back down either, so he gets ready to fight as well. The battle begins with Alan outpacing Leah and going for the first attack. His attack shocks Leah, and she is pushed back by the force. However, Leah, even while being disbalanced, pulls out a special move to get out of danger. A separation is created between the two of them, as Alan understands that Leah's black flames will cause him trouble, so he must avoid it. However, he wants to continue attacking, this time mixing it in with a few feints. But this time, it is Leah who outspeeds him and goes for the attack. She uses the Dragonic Rage technique, but Alan manages to block it with one of his own moves. Leah is quite shocked by his abilities and asks Alan what move he had just used. Alan says that he isn't sure what she is referring to, but both of the moves he has used so far are developed by him. Hearing this, Leah understands why Rhea picked Alan to join the academy. He is someone who has developed a very good swordcraft technique over the years, so she acknowledges him as a good swordsman. However, she also wants to teach him that hard work can only go so far in the face of raw talent, so she launches another attack on Alan. She uses the hegemonic style special move called the hard strike. Alan is startled and blocks the attack with an overhead crossblade, but Leah's sheer power makes it unable for him to keep the block. Leah notices that he is distracted, so she kicks Alan in the gut, knocking him back with her attack. Alan recovers from the blow, while analyzing how the soul attire's flames helped give Leah the extra push to make her attack more powerful. Leah then admits that in a battle of sheer swordsmanship, Alan is better than her. However, this is all the more reason why Alan should know that mastery over fundamentals will only get him so far against the power of the soul attire. Alan thinks that it is quite impressive how Leah can mix up her skills and soul attire so well. However, she isn't flawless. Her pure sword skills leave a lot to be desired, hence she over-relies on the soul attire. Which is why Alan thinks that he can exploit that. He had analyzed how Leah had been fighting in a conservative manner up until now. But now she knows that she can hurt Alan with the hard strike, so she will do it. Which is why he thinks it is about time he uses that special attack of his. As predicted, Leah charges in and performs the same hard strike skill again. But this time, Alan cuts through that using his second skill called Hazy Moon. He lands a quick and accurate slash to knock out Leah before she even realizes it. Rhea says that she expected this before calling off the fight, giving the W to Alan. Rhea praises Alan and says that she made the right decision by choosing him. However, Alan thinks that they should focus on Leah now because she is knocked out cold. Rhea says that is not an issue because Leah is a strong girl. Soon enough, Leah does wake up, but she is oblivious as to what had happened. When she remembers what happened, she asks for an explanation, questioning the strike Alan had landed. Alan says it is a preset strike, to which Leah says that she doesn't get it. Alan says that it is when he predicts the path his opponent is going to take, and plans a particular attack for that. So, when the opponent enters the path, the attack gets activated automatically. It's hard to land, but when it connects, it is game over. Leah is disheartened, as she refuses to accept the result and calls it cheating. Rhea then brings up the stakes they decided before the fight. Leah says that she doesn't remember, before she remembers that the loser must become a slave for the winner, and this flusters her. She tries to talk her way out of it, saying she didn't mean it literally, but figuratively instead. Rhea mentions that because there was no official paperwork behind the duel, she is willing to turn a blind eye to it. Alan is relieved by this because he didn't want a princess girl being his slave all of a sudden. But Rhea keeps teasing Leah, asking if she will be able to live without keeping a promise. This confuses Leah, who asks her what she exactly means. Rhea talks about how Leah, the princess of the Vestiria kingdom, a prodigy, just lost a battle that was set up by her and had her own reputation at stake. Not only that, but she is now refusing to follow up on the promise she made, and is ready to act like the duel never happened. However, Rhea is fine with it if Leah is fine with it as well. This puts Leah in a lot of distress, while Alan understood that Rhea was quite a character. She is someone who he needs to stay away from. Under tons of pressure, Leah finally gives in, and decides to accept the terms that she put up for the duel. Rhea tells her to not act as if Rhea forced her into this. She needs to do it on her own accord, either become his slave properly, and pretend like this never happened and lose a part of her dignity. Leah, in anger, finally turns around and bows down to Alan. She states that she is not worthy of him, but she will still serve him as his slave, and refers to him as master. And just like that, a princess had become a slave for a normal kid. But things get more awkward when Alan is shifted into Leah's room. This was also done by Rhea, who decides to get Alan fully shifted into Leah's room, because as a slave, Leah should always serve her master with the utmost priority. And hence why Alan was in the same room as Leah. He was going to live under the same roof as the princess. It made him wonder how the Vestiria kingdom would react if they found out about this. Seeing how embarrassed Leah was, Alan was confused as to what was even happening. Meanwhile, Rhea last note felt the faces Leah was making were quite funny. But on a more serious note, she was glad to see how the 3 exchange students have come along, which is why she thinks that the 3 of them will be the perfect fit to represent the Thousand Blades Academy at the Elite 5 Holy Festival. Following this, Alan thinks about how despite getting into his dream academy, things aren't going as smoothly as expected, and currently he was caught up in a big problem. Because Leah Vestiria was in front of him in nothing but a short towel. An hour before this, we see the tension being high as usual between the two. Alan doesn't want this to continue, and wonders why Rhea had chosen this. He does understand her point of view a bit, as she only enforced the normal rules and nothing more. After all, in the art of swordsmanship, duels are sacred. If someone loses a duel, they must fulfill the stakes that were put up before. Even Dodriel apologized to him after their duel. So, he doesn't think that someone like Leah will back down. But his male instincts were slowly kicking in, as he couldn't help but notice the tear on her shirt around the breast area. He understands that this must have been because of the duel, but he can't bring himself to tell her to cover up. Alan also looks around to check out her room, which was quite modest for a princess, yet looked how one would expect the room of a girl her age to look like. Leah notices this, and asks Alan to not check her room out, as it was quite creepy. Alan obliges. He also took this little moment of talk as an opening to tell her about the tear on her shirt. He starts taking his jacket off, which gives Leah the chills, as she thought that he was off to doing something indecent. But instead, Alan just gave her the jacket, telling her to cover up. Leah got confused by this, So Alan tells her about the tear on her shirt caused during the duel. Flustered, Leah quickly covers up. Alan then tries to talk with Leah, and she responds to him by calling him master. Alan tells her not to do that because it was very awkward. However, Leah told him that she has her own pride as a swordsman, so she must follow the rules. Alan appreciates her headstrong nature, so to make it work, he orders Leah to drop the slave behavior and act normally. Leah is opposed to this, but Alan tells her that she must follow his orders no matter what. Leah eventually agrees but tells him to drop the polite way of talking as well. Alan obliges, and brings up how it was quite the rough first day for them. Leah tells him that it is his fault for it to be like this. Alan thinks that he does deserve some blame for charging in the room, but she is more to blame for entering the men's bathhouse. Leah denies it, saying she was surely in the women's bathhouse, but the two come to deduce that it must have been Rhea who set them both up to have this altercation. They wonder why she did it, and Alan goes to call her a cruel woman. Following this, they talk and argue for a bit. After a while, Leah mentions how it is quite late, and that they should set up the beds. Alan tells her to go take a bath first, as he waits outside. Leah tells him that he should have said this in a less suggestive way, which confuses Alan, as he didn't mean to suggest anything. Leah then goes inside to take a shower, but tells Alan that she will finish him if he tries to peep. As she goes inside to change, Alan decides to do some freehand workout. Leah checks if the curtains were see-through or not, before stripping down and getting in the shower. She felt quite refreshed by it, but she also thought Alan was a weird guy. After all, he has her as a slave, yet has not tried to touch her even once. Not that she wants him to do that, but she is quite confident about her looks, so it is a bit confusing. She also thinks that Alan doesn't look bad, but as her father told her, all men are wolves, so she should keep her guard up. After all, he can strike any time. After being done with the bath, Leah comes out and realizes that she didn't bring a change of clothes. She could have asked Alan to do it for her if it was just pajamas, but she also needs her underwear. So, she decides to wrap around the short towel to her body and look for it herself. She walks out hesitantly, as Alan gets a look at her attractive body while doing push-ups. Seeing her makes him flip out immediately and get stunned by her. Leah tells him about how she came to get clothes and that it is nothing big. She then goes inside her room, while telling him to not enter without her permission. Alan then goes to take a bath. Once inside her room, Leah thought the reaction was quite cute, and that he seemed really innocent. She goes as far as to call her an herbivore male, but she quickly snaps back into being her normal self. She thinks he is a fraud, who is putting up an act, and that he will show his true predatory behavior during bedtime. The worst part being that she can't refuse him because she is his slave. So, she needs to be prepared for the worst. After a while, Leah gets out of her room to see Alan was already out, and understands that he is the kind of guy who doesn't take long to shower. She then asks him if he wants some water, before drinking water together with him. After this, they brush together in the cramped place. After this, they go to the bedroom. This is when Alan calls out to Leah, saying he is about to sleep. Leah thought this was where he was going to ask for sexual favors. She thought this was going to be her first time, without her consent nonetheless. But turns out, Alan just wanted to sleep on the floor, while she sleeps on the bed. Leah was shocked by how he wasn't even thinking about something like that, and wondered if she was the one with the dirty mind. Despite that, Leah tells him to not sleep on the floor and join her on the bed, because it'll be bad to have the master sleep on the floor, while the slave sleeps on the bed. Alan agrees to join her, and they end up sleeping on the same bed, under the same blanket. They both awkwardly greet each other good night, before Alan sleeps. Leah, however, felt confused by how he is such a nice guy. She decides to take advantage of his sleeping, and starts pulling his cheeks. However, he doesn't wake up. After a while, she finally backs down, convinced he is really nice and innocent, and that he is quite hot too. But she quickly asks herself why she was thinking like that. Eventually, Leah also falls asleep. The next day, all the students go to school for their first proper day. Alan and Leah get along quite well, as Leah tells him about the food in her country, and that she will show him a particular restaurant when they get the chance. Alan feels assured seeing Leah so friendly, assuming that a proper night's sleep did wonders. Once inside, Lia is approached by other girls, and she talks to them with elegance and grace. Alan understands that she really is a princess, but wonders where the bratty side of her comes from. Alan decides to let Lia have her girl talk with others, as he goes to sit down somewhere. He was free to pick his seat, and ends up seeing a couple of guys talking about seeing a giant woman yesterday. So he decides to go say them hi. However, they give him the cold shoulder and ignore him in disgust. Alan gets that this is caused by the horrendous introduction from yesterday, but chooses to ignore it. Lia then walks up to those same guys, and they treat her with respect and attention, making Alan think of them as hypocrites. However, Lia was there to point out how they ignored Alan saying hi, and asked if their conversation was so important for them to ignore him. The guys, clearly guilty, make an excuse of not hearing him, calling his voice weak. But Lia makes it clear that she hates the kind of people who act like this, and tells them to never talk to her again. The guys are stunned, while the girls wonder why Lia was defending the cheater who got in through bribing. Alan apologizes to Lia for what happened, but Lia tells him that she just did it because she feels that way. After this, Rose Valencia comes to the classroom, totally sleepy, with her hair and uniform being a mess. She comes down and sits in front of Lia and Alan, greeting Alan more enthusiastically than Lia. Alan points out her messy hair and asks if she needs assistance with that, but Rose says that it'll eventually come into place thanks to gravity. Following this, the chairwoman, Rhea Lasnote, enters the classroom. Everyone was a bit confused as to why she was there, but she announces that she will be the homeroom teacher for their class. Alan wasn't pleased by this because he knows her nature. After some talking, Rhea Lasnote brings up the Elite 5 Holy Festival, where the 5 elite academies select their 3 best students and put them into competition against each other. Everyone is understandably hyped about it, as it is their moments to shine. However, Rhea says that unlike past years, where they would wait for physical test results to come out before picking a team, they've already decided their representatives for this year. This was a bummer for the students, and Alan understood where this was heading and didn't like it one bit. Rhea then states that their 3 participants for the festival will be Lia Visteria, Rose Valencia, and Alan Rodal. This angers all of the students, and one of the guys who ignored Alan stands up to protest. He says that he understands the selection of Lia and Rose, as they are undeniably better than the rest at the moment. However, he doesn't support the selection of Alan Rodal, a good-for-nothing self-taught swordsman who came from a nothing school from a nothing place. So he demands that they reconsider his selection. Alan feels bad because of this and wondered why he was being hated so much. Rhea hears this, calls out to Alan, and then makes fun of him for being so hated. This pisses off Alan, but he knows that he can't show temper and give her the pleasure of successfully teasing her, so he ignores her. Rhea tells Alan that he nearly isn't as fun to tease as Lia. After this, Alan walks up to Rhea and tells her that he doesn't want to participate in such a festival, because it is the place where students show off what they learned from their school of style. However, Alan wasn't allowed into any style school at the Grand Swordcraft Academy, so he wants to bow out of this one. Rhea hears him out and decides to tell it to everyone. However, being the prankster she is, she instead tells the 3 students who ignored him that Alan called them incompetent and not on his level. So he challenges them to a 3-on-1 duel right then and there. This makes the trio irate, as they vow to teach Alan a lesson. Alan tries to explain that Rhea made it up, but Rhea doubles down and says that she likes to see the confidence on Alan. This made Alan want to punch her in the face, but alas, he was dragged into the duel arena for the 2nd consecutive day. Once there, one of the trio stepped forward and declared that he will be taking out Alan by himself. This was good for Alan, as it saved him the effort of going 3-on-1, so he tells him to bring it on. The guy wastes no time to charge at Alan. Seeing his speed and grip, Alan guesses he is quite good technically. But as he is about to use his iron style move, Alan picks out his weak footwork and does a leg sweep to knock him down. He then points the sword to the guy's neck, claiming victory. However, Rhea disapproves of it because it is supposed to be a 3-on-1 and tells them to do it the proper way. She somehow manages to piss off Alan more. Meanwhile, the guy was attended to by his 2 friends, who asked him how he went down so easily. He informs his friends that Alan isn't as bad as they thought, and that they need to take him seriously. So, the three of them surround Alan, waiting for him to attack first so that the other two can pounce. Alan didn't want this at all, but he has to, so he charges at the first guy with supersonic speed. He uses the 8-crow slash technique that took out Rose on his opponent, before others can react. His opponent tries to use Cloud-style attack himself, but succumbs to Alan. The other one finally makes a move on Alan, trying to attack him with his iron style like earlier, but he is too slow, and Alan manages to take him out with one simple strike. However, Alan got too distracted, and this allowed the third and final guy to blindside him, and use the moon style on Alan. Alan realizes that he won't be able to dodge this attack, even if he wanted to, but because his opponent was in his range, he pulls off the hazy moon move that defeated Lia, and takes him out. Just like that, Alan had won over each and everyone in the class, and now they wanted him to teach them. Rose and Lia also went up to Alan, with Rose asking him about the final move. Alan explains the hazy moon to her, which impresses Rose, as Lia adds that she still thinks it is unfair. Just then, the fallen opponent were struggling to get up, so Alan walks up to them to offer them help. However, he wonders if they will feel disrespected and fight again. However, they're all very sportsmanlike and take his hand. They then apologize to Alan in turns, saying sorry for having misjudged him. Alan tells them it is no big deal. He understands why they feel antagonized by him. After all, they trained hard to get in while Alan was just picked directly. The guys then tell Alan that he is not only the more skilled individual but also the better man, and call him the perfect representative for them. They strike up a respectful friendship. Rhea asks if everyone is okay with Alan's selection now, and they unanimously say yes. Alan still asked if it is really okay, considering there are other classes in their year too. But the students tell him that it is okay because they're class 1A, and the classes are arranged based on grades, so they're better than the other classes, which means that whatever decision they make is going to be accepted. Alan breathes a sigh of relief, before Rhea once again announces that the 3 representatives for 1,000 Blades at the Elite 5 Holy Festival will be Lia Visteria, Rose Valencia, and Alan Rodal, to everyone's happiness. The next day, they make students were out in the gymnasium wearing light gym clothes, feeling chilly. Alan thought the clothing was too light for a very early morning in April. However, the other students tell him to wait for the girls. The girls walk out in the same shirts, but with much shorter pants. The guys tell Alan that it is a ritual among the 5 elite schools that the girls need to wear bloomers for their gym clothes bottom, although they weren't clearly pleased about it because of the weather. The guys then pray to the elite schools, thanking them for having girls wear such clothes, which Alan found weird. Following this, Lia Visteria comes up to Alan and asks him how she is looking. Alan didn't know how to respond or where to look at, to be honest. However, he remembers Miss Paula telling him that if a girl asks this question, he should respond by telling them that they look great. Alan does just that, and it makes Lia very happy, and she runs off to the other girls to talk about it. Soon after, Rose Valencia also walks up to Alan and asks him the same question. Just like Lia, he answers the same to her, which makes Rose very happy, and she goes to her friends and does the same. This makes Alan wonder if they're performing some sort of activity. Just then, Rhea Lastnote shows up to test the class. Her loud voice was screechingly loud and annoying, and Alan took that as her being a morning person. Rhea Lastnote tells the students that they will be doing a physical test now, which will help the academy assess them better. She talks about 3 particular tests: the draw-strike test, the tenfo test, and the multi-strike test. She explains the draw-strike test first, where the student will have to unsheathe their swords and cut down a piece of wood. The school will be tracking the amount of time they need to do all of that. An old man who has been doing this job for 50 years will be tracking the time, so she asks for the students to treat him with respect. And so, Rhea Lastnote announces the beginning of the physical tests. The first one called into action is none other than Lia Visteria. Once on the spot, she uses her speed to quickly unsheathe the sword and cut the bamboo in half. The timekeeper calculated that it took her only 0.5 seconds to cut it, which was impressive. Lia was happy with her performance. Rhea Lastnote considers it a good start to the tournament, and then asks Rose Valencia to come to the stage next. Being the prodigy that she is, Rose Valencia uses her secret cherry blossom style to quickly cut the bamboo using the lightning Sakura move. Her effort saw her climb to first place, as it took her only 0.3 seconds to cut it down. Rose Valencia considers this a victory over Lia Vestiria, who seethes in jealousy. Meanwhile, an oblivious Alan thought those two were getting along quite well. Raya Last Note also praises Rose Valencia, calling her secret cherry blossom a treat to watch as always. She then calls Alan Rodal into action. Alan Rodal wasn't very confident about his drawing strike, as this was his weakest point. But he thinks that maybe training for over 1 billion years must surely be enough to improve it a little bit. So he does the strike, which leaves a precise cut on the bamboo. Raya is impressed by his speed, and Alan also feels like he did a good job. He goes up to the timekeeper and asks him how his time was, which leaves the timekeeper confused. The timekeeper didn't know what he was referring to, because he didn't even see the cut taking place. Alan Rodal tells him that the cut had indeed taken place and shows him where he made it. This stuns the timekeeper, who had his mind blown by Alan's speed. He had been working as a timekeeper for ages, and never once had he seen something as ridiculous. Raya tells Alan that there is nothing they can do about it. He is just too quick. However, to get him on the scoreboard, she requested Alan to do it again, but this time he should do it more slowly. This really confused Alan because he didn't expect Raya to tell him to go slow in a competition based on speed. Alan agrees to do so, and as suggested, he slows down his next draw strike attempt to still end up achieving first place, as his slowed down strike was still clocked at just 0.1 seconds. He then proceeded to break the all-time Academy record for the Tenfo Challenge and the multi-strike competition, courtesy of his Flying Shadow and 8 Crow strike moves. And with that, the competition comes to an end as announced by Raya Last Note. Because everyone did so well, she informed the students that she would keep the gym open for the rest of the day, so they could go ahead and use it in any way they wanted to. This cheered up the students, as Alan was glad that his progress was going well. Just then, one of the other students steps in and asks Alan about the move he used during the Tenfo Challenge. He was referring to the Flying Shadow technique, and he wanted Alan to teach him how to do that in exchange for him teaching Alan how to do his special iron style. Alan appreciates the offer but declines teaching him because he doesn't consider himself good enough to teach someone else. However, the guy was desperate and begged Alan to teach him how to do it. Eventually, Alan agrees, which makes the guy very happy. However, this just makes all the other students rush at him as well. They ask him to teach them various techniques like the Flying Shadow and the 8 Crow Slash, in exchange for them teaching him their style. This also prompts Rose Valencia and Lia Vestiria to join in as well. Overwhelmed, Alan Rodal suggests they all teach each other different styles. They proceed to have a lot of fun teaching one another. Alan couldn't believe that he was actually having fun with people he could call friends, talking about the stuff he liked. His 3 years at his previous Swordcraft Academy destroyed his love for the game, and the relentless bullying made it so that he couldn't even have a single moment of happiness throughout his time here. Yet, here he was having the time of his life. Lia wanted to ask Alan something, but suddenly, she noticed that Alan was tearing up from happiness. She asks Alan what had happened, to which a shocked Alan wipes his tears off, saying something had gotten into his eyes. He subsequently got back into teaching them again. The next day, the students had the day off, so Alan thought this was the perfect opportunity for him to train from dusk till dawn, and he couldn't be more pleased about it. Just then, Lia Vestiria comes to him and asks him if he is free today. This took Alan aback, as he didn't honestly want her to ask this question. He didn't really know how to respond to her in this case. Lia asked him if he was busy, in which case she was sorry. Alan knew that it was definitely important for him to train, but it was also just as important to spend time with friends. So, he tells her that he is free and that he can go along with her. This pleases Lia, who suggests they go out and have some razmak. Confused, Alan asks her what that is. Lia reminds him how she told him about it, and that it is one of the traditional foods of Vestiria. Alan remembers it, so Lia tells him to come along with her to a nearby restaurant. Once outside, the two of them can't help but appreciate how nice the day was. Alan mistakenly says that it was a great day to be outside and train, but manages to correct himself and state that it was a good day to hang out. Lia looks at him and asks him if he wanted to say something else. Alan lies and says that not even a person like him could think of swordcraft on such a great day. However, he was thinking about it, and this was thanks to the billions of years he spent training. It rewired his brain to think of training as the only thing that mattered. Lia Visteria subsequently apologizes to him for doubting him. After that, as they are about to enter the restaurant, they run into Rose Valencia, who questions why the two of them were hanging out on their day off. Alan explains that they were just going out together to eat ramzak. Rose also doesn't know what a ramzak is, so Alan tells her it is a food from Lia's hometown of Vesteria and invites her to join along with them. Rose agrees, but this pisses Lia off, who wants to spend some time with Alan. Rose agrees, all to the dismay of Lia, who, despite being pissed off, tells them to follow her lead and takes them to the restaurant. Once there, Lia orders ramzak for the three of them. She tells the two of them that the restaurant is good and that they pride themselves on how big their servings are. Rose and Alan find this interesting. However, when they actually end up serving the huge pile of ramzak to them, it actually turns them off more than anything. Lia was very excited, though. Alan thought it looked good, but it was a bit too much. Rose agreed, but thought that it smelled nice enough. After this, Lia suggests they all dig in and eat it. Upon taking the first bite, Alan is shocked by how good it tastes. Felt like the best thing ever at that moment. Not only that, but finishing the huge serving no longer felt like a challenge. Fast forward half an hour, and Alan realized that it was, in fact, not so easy to finish it off after all. Despite it being tasty, there was a lot of it and simply too hard for them to finish. However, Lia was gulping it down with ease, and as if it felt like nothing. Just then, Alan's eyes met Rose's, and he felt awkward. He didn't know how to react. Rose notices this and calls Alan out for his awkward behavior around her. She didn't understand why he always acts so weird and formal around her, when there is no reason for him to. Alan also understood that he was acting like that for no reason and told Rose that she would be more casual with her from now on. As Alan and Rose start to open up to one another, it bothers Lia, who boils over in jealousy. So, she interrupts them by loudly exclaiming how she has finished off the ramzak. After that, she tells them to follow her as she wants to visit other stores. What follows is a tour of various famous spots within the town, including the aquarium and general store. However, the latest stop was definitely the hardest for him to handle, because it was the most famous jewelry shop in the town. The girls were trying out various items and asking Alan how they looked. He praised them and wanted them to be careful with the expensive items. He knew that such jewelry wouldn't put a dent in Rose and Lia's bank balance, but for a poor kid like him, this was a lot. If he were to break one by mistake, it would ruin his life. He would have to quit school and start working to pay the store back for the loss. So, he decides to sit down on the bench rather than walking around the store. Noticing this, both Lia and Rose got concerned and attended to him. They asked him if he was sick or feeling bad from all the walking around. Alan told them he was just sitting down to rest and that he was feeling perfectly fine. He suggests the two of them enjoy their time together, but make sure not to break anything. They agree but tell him to call them if he starts feeling bad at any point. As they go, Lia asks Rose how many months' salary she would want her boyfriend to spend on her while shopping. It must be at least the standard 3 months of salary. Rose says that she would definitely like it if they spent 3 months' salary on her. But the thought is what matters the most to her, so she is fine without him spending even 1 month's salary as long as he is nice. Lia praises her and calls Rose an ideal partner, which Rose appreciates. As Alan wonders just what the girls were talking about, a bunch of masked burglars enter the store. They carry blades and threaten the customers and staff to hand over the jewelry to them. Alan and the girls decided not to make a move as a lot of civilians were around, and they did not want to risk their lives. However, when one of the burglars hits a female staff member, it angers them. It makes all 3 of them attack the burglars at once using their special moves. They take out most of them without a hitch. However, one of them makes a run to exit the store. The girls decide to chase him, as it is better to care for the woman who got hit instead of attacking that one guy. However, Alan thinks he got the guy in his range, and so He uses the flying shadow technique to take them out. The next day, the three of them are approached by the students at the school, who praise them for taking out the burglars and saving the store. Confused, Alan asks the guy how he knows about this. The guy shows them the newspaper, which had the picture of the three of them on the front page. Alan notes how his picture came out smaller compared to Rose and Leah, who were at the forefront. However, the girls insisted that it was fine because he was still looking like himself, despite being further away from the camera. Alan didn't really care, though. He was just happy to know that the employees and customers were fine. Later, as the trio is talking about how the first few matchups for the Elite 5 Holy Festival have been announced, they are all called to the chairwoman's office at the same time. They go there and knock on her door, but Rhea last note tells them to wait outside for a bit, because she was in the middle of something. After a while, she finally lets them inside. Alan thinks about how Rhea must be working a lot. After all, she is the chairwoman of such a prestigious academy, so she must be working more than most people could imagine. However, Rhea reveals that she really enjoyed the issue she was reading. Confused, they ask her what exactly she was referring to. Rhea states that she was reading a one-shot manga and thought it had nice potential to be serialized. This deflated Alan and the others. Alan then directly asks her how she gets to have so much time on her when she is the chairwoman. Rhea says that she lets someone else do the work for her. Just then, Alan and the others notice an old man working with a bunch of papers, and working relentlessly at that. Alan was stunned by how the guy had kept his presence hidden despite being in the room, and wondered how one could stay so low profile. Rhea tells them that the guy is called Number 18. The students are obviously weirded out by such a weird name, so Rhea reveals that the guy is actually a heinous criminal who has been sentenced to 100 years of hard labor. Shocked, the girls ask her why a convicted criminal was there, to which Rhea says that he is the one handling the paperwork, scheduling, and meetings for her. Alan finally understands why Rhea has so much free time, because all of the work is done by Number 18. Still, they were curious about what he had done, which caused him to be sentenced to 100 years of hard labor. Rhea reveals that his crime was peeping. Taken aback, Alan asks if it is the kind of peeping he thinks it is. Rhea says that it is indeed a case of that. Despite being an old man, he has a weird fetish for teenage girls, and he travels all around the country to peek at them when they are changing. This disgusts the girls, who declare him the enemy of all women. Alan understands that he is a bad man, but he questions whether his crimes really warrant a 100-year sentence. Rhea explains that this old man used to be a student of the Thousand Blades Academy. He was also a great swordsman in his prime. So, by the time he was caught, he had already gotten away with hundreds of crimes. Even after getting caught, he would easily escape from prison. They accumulated all of his crimes together and came to the conclusion of giving him 100 years of hard labor. Still, the girls didn't feel comfortable having such a perverted criminal around, and for Rhea to have her in her room. However, Rhea reassures them that she has taught him a good lesson. This is made even clearer when they see the man quiver in fear when Rhea touches his shoulder. This made Alan wonder just what kind of lesson Rhea had taught the guy for him to be like this. This is when Rhea remembers that she called them here for a different reason. The reason is that their first match in the Elite 5 Holy Festival has been announced, and it is against their eternal rivals in the Ice King Academy. This confuses the students, so Rhea explains how there was a time period where the Ice King Academy and Thousand Blades Academy would compete fiercely at the top of the Elite 5 ladder. It would mostly end with Thousand Blades on top, while Ice King had to settle for second place. This was more prominent during Rhea's time as a student. It was a period of total domination for Thousand Blades, as they always came out on top against Ice King. However, that was the past, and things have taken a turn for the worse since. Both academies have taken a huge dip in profile after facing several problems. The media certainly didn't help them by berating them publicly. More recently, though, the Thousand Blades Academy has also lost to the Elite King Academy, making them the worst of the Elite 5. However, what infuriates Rhea even more is that instead of aiming to get better, the Ice King Academy has instead focused on competing and defeating Thousand Blades only. It's like they have singled them out as targets and are taking revenge for all the times they had to finish second because of Thousand Blades. This pisses off Leah and Rose too, who think this sort of behavior is unacceptable. Rhea thinks the same, so she tells them that there is no way they can lose to Ice King. To assure their victory, Rhea stayed up all night and prepared the perfect lineup for their match against them. Seeing it, Alan thinks she came up with a pretty reasonable lineup. Alan Rodal starts things off as the vanguard. Rose Valencia comes in as center, while Leah Visteria finishes things off as the captain. However, the girls didn't understand why Alan was made the vanguard, instead of being the captain. However, Rhea made this while having everything in her mind. She doesn't want a normal victory over the Ice King. She wants to humiliate them. Not often do people put their strongest as the first one charging on. So, when Alan goes ahead and beats all three of Ice King's competitors at once, it will shock them. They would be losing without even getting to see the center and the captain. What could be more humiliating than that? It would also scare them out of messing with them again, because they will think that if the vanguard is someone as strong as Alan, they would only imagine how much stronger Rose and Leah are. However, this scares the crap out of Alan. He thinks it is impossible. He cannot imagine himself beating three of the Ice King Academy's best on his own. He wonders if Rhea has gone mad, or if she has overestimated his abilities. Meanwhile, Rhea goes on about how she can imagine the look on the faces of their enemy once Alan beats all of them by himself. On the day of the festival, though, Rhea is left angered after looking at the participants list. The Ice King Academy had arrogantly only put out 2 competitors to fight against the Thousand Blades Academy. They left the vanguard spot empty. This angered Rhea and the 2 girls, who thought this was beyond disrespectful. Even the straight-laced Alan understands that this is an indirect way to tell them that 2 is enough to beat 3 of the Thousand Blades Academy, and he didn't like this one bit. Pissed off, Rhea goes over to the reception and announces changes to their lineup as well. She wants to remove both the vanguard and the central, and instate Alan Rodal as the sole captain, because she knows that he can beat them all. However, the receptionist denies her, saying it is already 2 days past the deadline of the lineup changes. Irate, Rhea asks them why they allowed Ice King Academy to change their lineup, but the receptionist explains that they did before the given deadline was up. Alan tries to calm Rhea down, but before he can do so, they are interrupted by the Ice King Academy representatives, who call Rhea's lack of control repulsive. The woman, flanked by 2 men, seemingly a former acquaintance of Rhea's, greets her. Rhea is pissed off by her remarks, but her anger is turned up a notch when she recognizes the woman as Ferris, the director of the Ice King Academy. Rhea calls her a cheap vixen and condemns her use of such underhanded tactics to try and act superior when she is not. Ferris replies by calling Rhea a loudmouth nobody and says that she only sent the necessary amount of people to beat them, nothing much. Rhea last note tells Ferris that she hasn't changed one bit. She still talks a big game but accounts for nothing. She reminds him of all the times Rhea beat her during their school days. Ferris calls her out for bringing up the past to make herself feel better, but also reminds Rhea that times have changed. As things stood, Ice King Academy was far superior to the Thousand Blades Academy. A war of childish words erupted between the two, as Rhea mocks Ferris' use of heavy makeup, while Ferris mocks Rhea's intellect. They start bickering like kids, which has Alan wondering how messed up the country is, because these women are leading figures within it. Rhea subsequently declares this to be the revival of the Golden Period, where Thousand Blades Academy ruled as the undisputed best of the Elite 5. Whereas Ferris thinks that all of that is big talk, and warns Rhea to not cry when she eventually loses. Ferris then asks her 2 participants, Sid and Kane, to come with her. Meanwhile, Rhea also suggests to her students that they should part ways. Alan was overwhelmed by the whole argument, but suddenly, he is shocked to feel a very powerful aura. It was coming from one of the Ice King guys, and his aura was very cold-blooded. This made it clear to Alan that beating those guys wouldn't be as easy of a task as he thought it would be. After that, the crew were in the dugout when suddenly, the announcement for the first match of the battle between the Thousand Blades Academy and Ice King Academy was said to be starting. Alan thought the atmosphere was good for him, just the right amount of tension to get him in the zone. His teammates wish Alan good luck and tell him how losing won't be an option. Alan takes it in his stride and states that he will do his best before walking out of the West Gate. Alan is pleasantly surprised by the huge crowd turnout. He is also taken aback by seeing quite a lot of his classmates being there in attendance, and they were cheering heartily for him. This brings a smile to Alan's face, as he comes to realize that this wasn't the old days where he would have to fight alone. Now, he has the support of his friends, and he has to live up to their expectations. Just then, Cain Material of the Ice King Academy arrives from the East Gate. Cain's elegant and handsome looks has all the girls cheering for him and going crazy. Cain asks Alan his name, before telling him that, today, as honorable practitioners of swordcraft, they will fight a duel that won't shame the gods. Alan nods back, and he is actually a bit surprised by how Cain was conducting himself. He thought he would be different based on how the Ice King Academy's director was acting with them, but Cain was surprisingly polite. After that, the referee confirms if both the participants are ready, and calls for the start of the match. Alan is quickly taken aback right at the beginning, as Cain begins using his magic. He uses it to summon the Hell 100 Blade, his special spirit ornament. With that in hand, Cain charges in to fight, ready to deliver justice on Alan. As Cain charges in, Alan could tell he was fast, but his movements were far too straightforward and easy for him to read. Alan decides to swipe him away with his blade and then strike his open guard. However, to his surprise, Alan Rodal goes down. This stunned the Thousand Blades camp, as they were shocked to see Alan go down so easily. Cain elegantly celebrated, as he thought that he had defeated the foolish Alan. Meanwhile, Alan wakes up in a dimension not too unlike the million-year button dimension. A reverse countdown of 100 years goes down there. Alan assumes that it must be caused by being cut by Cain's Hell 100 spirit ornament. He uses his sword to cut through the dimension, and he easily manages to do that. Alan now knew that he could escape this world. However, because he had 100 years in hand, Alan thought he might as well train a bit. Meanwhile, in the real world, the referee considers calling off the match despite it ending so quickly. The Hell 100 is too strong of an attack to brush off. However, just then, Alan wakes up and tells the referee that he can still continue, as the match had only just begun. The referee is flabbergasted to see Alan up and okay after taking a blow from the Hell 100. He asks Alan if he is really okay. Alan says he can't be sure but asks to continue. The referee allows it. As Cain was celebrating with his back turned, Alan decided now was the time to get serious. So he charged at Cain, shocking the guy. He uses the special Cherry Blossom One Sword Style's mirrored Sakura slash to put down Cain, who groggily manages to ask him how his mind didn't break after suffering for 100 years thanks to the Hell 100. Alan laughed and told him that it was just 100 years, which is not much at all. The referee is stunned by Alan's monstrous strength as he declares that Cain Material is unable to continue, which meant Alan was the winner. The crowd behind Alan erupted in cheers. Leah told him he was amazing out there, while Rhea praised him for doing the job and holding his own against a spirit ornament. Alan thanks them for praising him. Rose Valencia questions Alan how he learned to use her secret style. Alan explains that when he was trapped in the Hell 100's 100-year curse, he decided to use that time to train himself. Once there, he decided to practice all the moves and styles he had learned from his Class A mates from the other day. He particularly put emphasis on Rose's Cherry Blossom style by reimagining her movements. Rose was astonished to know that he had learned the Cherry Blossom style by reimagining movements, when it took her years to get it. Alan clarifies that her mirrored Sakura slash is different from that of Rose's. He combined it with his own Yatagarasu technique. Rose is even more deflated by the fact that he made it better. Alan insisted that it was not exactly better, but Rose says that it was better and sharper. Leah Visteria and Rhea Lastnote were annoyed by this conversation, so Alan promised to make it up to Rose by teaching her the new technique. Rose smiles and agrees. After that, the announcement for the beginning of the second match is made. Rhea pats Alan on the back and tells him to go and win it to finish off the match. As the team's vanguard, Alan re-enters the field. Meanwhile, for the Ice King Academy, their captain, Sid Euclid, the guy with the vicious aura, makes his way out. The moment he enters the arena, the Ice King Academy's cheering crowd silences out. They seem to fear him for some reason. The announcement also declares that because they are using just 2 people, if Ice King Academy loses again, they'll lose. Alan Rodal would be able to guarantee 1,000 blades their first finish away from the last spot in 10 years. Furthermore, information regarding the two of them said that both men were self-taught, which meant the fight was going to produce something insane. Just then, someone in the crowd laughs out, mocking how it was weird for there to be self-taught swordscraft practitioners in the modern age. This angers Sid Euclid, who throws a knife at the man. It misses him by a bit and breaks the wall behind him. Sid admitted that he missed that one by mistake and asked the guy if he really laughed at him. If so, Sid already memorized his face, so he warns the guy to stay safe during nights, because Sid might attack him anytime. Alan is honestly awestruck by seeing what Sid Euclid had done. He couldn't believe how Sid had thrown that knife with an intention to take the mocker's life. Not to mention the insane accuracy and power it took for him to throw it that high up and deep into the stands, made it even more impressive. The referee chooses to ignore this incident and asks the two guys if they are ready to fight. As Alan stands focused and Sid stands more relaxed, the referee calls for the start of the duel. The fight begins, but Alan is perplexed as to why Sid was just there, standing on his ground. He wasn't putting up a guard, nor was he attacking. Alan wondered if that's what he really wants. He can just go in and finish him off quickly. Alan uses his special flying shadow technique. However, the flying shadow disappears mid-attack, as Sid stood there nonchalantly. Alan wonders if this was done by Sid's spirit ornament and chooses to attack again. This time Alan manages to catch a glimpse of Sid just casually swatting his flying shadow away. Alan couldn't believe it. He barely even saw it despite focusing on Sid's sword. Such was his speed. Alan then declares that they are not here for some boring snooze fest. They were there to fight, and so he rushes in and vows to crush Alan Rodal right. Sid Euclid viewed Alan Rodal as nothing more than a minor annoyance rather than a real threat, though this clash was starting to shape Alan's own understanding of swordscraft. The way Sid fought was by relying purely on his overwhelming physical power to rip through anything in his path while his movements seemed to have no limitations. Alan Rodal made a mental note that Sid Euclid was missing the genuine heart that a true swordsman should possess, and Alan vowed that his own conviction would never be surpassed. Alan stared deeply at his opponent, which caused Sid to get irritated and snap at Alan by asking if he had a problem with Sid's face. Sid Euclid warned Alan Rodal that he needed to wake up to the reality that a low-class loser with zero talent could never hope to take down a superior being like Sid. Alan responded by acknowledging that Sid was a natural genius, but insisted that Alan Rodal was the one destined to win this specific encounter. Sid gave a cold smirk and told Alan to give it his best shot, since if Alan had a wish to lose his life, he should have just been honest about it from the start. Alan Rodal initiated a sequence using the cloud and dark sky styles as his opponent continued to bark insults at him. Alan refused to let Sid Euclid find any breathing room as he chained the cutting iron and iron break styles before transitioning into the Oko and Sakura Blossom styles. Alan Rodal spotted a moment where Sid stumbled and lost his footing, so he immediately capitalized by using that same move and adding the mirror strike. Alan sensed that his current output was still lacking, so he pushed further by incorporating the 8th sword and the Yagarasu technique into his combo. The two fighters eventually pulled back to catch their wind, and Alan Rodal gave credit where it was due by saying Sid Euclid was a formidable foe. Sid countered by saying Alan's talent was noteworthy, but that it was his only strength, while Sid's overall sword skills were on a completely different planet. Alan Rodal began to laugh, which drove Sid Euclid into a blind rage as he charged forward and screamed at Alan to shut his mouth. Sid yelled that all that talk about having a heart for the sword and hard work was just garbage that losers told themselves, and it only highlighted how ugly Alan truly is. Sid went on to scream that no matter how much effort a piece of trash like Alan exerts, he is still just trash, and that Sid's raw talent would always crush Alan's pathetic hard work. Sid Euclid then called upon his spiritual weapon Van Ararand and ordered the weapon to start consuming everything in the immediate vicinity. Alan Rodal had a hunch that his rival could pull out a weapon like this, but seeing it in person confirmed his suspicions, and Alan remarked that it looked much more impressive now. Sid let out a laugh and said Alan had a good eye before hurling a massive ice spear directly at Alan Rodal. Alan Rodal managed to roll away from the strike and found himself in awe of the sheer destructive capability and power of that spear. Sid Euclid asked Alan what he was gawking at and swung the frozen weapon toward Alan once again. Alan knew that if he hesitated for even a split second his life would be over, so he started to sprint away from the relentless barrage. This behavior only made Sid more furious as he commanded Alan to stop acting like a coward while he ramped up the tempo and weight of his attacks. Alan Rodal realized he was in a tight spot because SID's mobility had skyrocketed the moment he triggered his cold weapon spirit ornament. Sid Euclid seemed to read the look on Alan's face and asked if Alan was shocked by how much faster Sid had become. Alan asked for clarification on what Sid meant by that, and Sid simply told him to inspect his own hands. Alan Rodal was horrified to discover that his skin had turned a shade of blue, and Sid mocked him by asking if he was ignorant of how hypothermia works. Alan understood then that Sid Euclid had successfully lured him into a trap and that his chances of survival were looking very slim. Sid asked if Alan had finally reached his breaking point and decided to finish him off by unleashing an even more brutal assault than before. Sid Euclid hammered him with a series of heavy strikes, and Alan Rodal finally succumbed to the overwhelming force and hit the dirt. Sid spat on the ground and complained that Alan had ruined his footwear, and he admitted to himself that he might have gone a bit overboard with his aggression. Sid caught the sounds of the worried crowd and the frantic crying of Leah Visteria and Rose Valencia, so he looked over at them and agreed with their fears. Sid Euclid concluded that it was better not to let Alan linger in pain and decided he would just end the boy's life right then and there. Sid drew back his blade to deliver a lethal ice strike while Alan's friends Leah and Rose let out a scream of pure desperation. But in that exact moment Alan Rodal reached up and firmly caught the sharp edge of the blade with his bare hand. Alan Rodal recognized the fact that he was stuck in place, and he questioned if this moment would truly be his end. Alan Rodal had no intention of dying or accepting a loss because he was determined to prove he could surpass a genius like Sid Euclid. With a sense of bitterness, Alan Rodal told himself that he was falling short once again, but Sid Euclid prepared to finish the fight. Alan Rodal gripped the sword with immense strength, which caused Sid Euclid to realize that Alan Rodal had finally woken up from his sleep. Alan Rodal lost track of time and wondered if he had been gone for 100 years or even 1,000 billion years. The companions of Alan Rodal breathed a sigh of relief even though they were confused by what was happening, as Alan had totally changed his getup. The director noted that Alan Rodal had finally shown up, and that she had anticipated. Alan Rodal started talking to himself in third person, and added that he still didn't put match value to Alan Rodal, because he only saw him as someone incapable of handling such power. He, the person within him, claimed that Alan Rodal was completely devoid of talent. Meanwhile, Sid Euclid asked what Alan Rodal really was, since he appeared to be a spiritual core. The spirit within Alan Rodal wondered why he must waste his words on someone like Sid Euclid, who was about to be turned into nothing more than a wet spot on the floor. Alan Rodal further asked Sid Euclid if he had any idea who he was talking to, which only served to make Sid Euclid feel more insulted. Sid Euclid commanded Alan Rodal to vanish and stop being an eyesore as he raised his ice spear to strike Alan Rodal again. The friends of Alan Rodal screamed for him to get out of the way while the new Alan complained about how bored he was with the fight. Alan Rodal, in his new form, complete with long white hair and a slender body, easily stops Sid Euclid's attack with ease. Alan Rodal looked at Sid Euclid and asked what was wrong with his face and if Sid Euclid really thought he could frighten Alan Rodal with those toys. Alan Rodal's new version then noticed that the body he had was frail, because it couldn't withstand his power. This angered him, and made him get mad at the old hermit for giving him such a body. Alan Rodal insulted the old man and asked why his body was so frail and if the old man was playing a joke on him. Alan Rodal muttered to himself that when he finally catches that old man, the old man was going to regret it. Sid Euclid believed that Alan Rodal was distracted just as he had planned, and he decided to land his signature strike while Alan Rodal was looking away. However, just as the blade was about to hit, Alan Rodal turned around and caught the end of the sword. Alan Rodal warned Sid Euclid not to assume he was distracted because Alan Rodal had the entire situation under control. The shocked Sid Euclid could not believe what was happening while Alan Rodal asked if that move was really the best Sid Euclid could do. Alan Rodal said he felt a deep pity for Sid Euclid and that he was so sorry for him that he was at a loss for words. Alan Rodal released the sword and shoved Sid Euclid back while thinking that he could not believe his first opponent after returning was such a fool. Alan Rodal decided it was fine because he needed time to adjust to this new body and try to survive for a short while longer. Alan Rodal launched an attack, and Sid Euclid realized that if this power came from the spiritual core, then there was likely a limit on how long it would last. Sid Euclid knew that if he could stay in the match against Alan Rodal, then he still had a pathway to victory. Alan Rodal observed that his reaction time had become much faster, and he told Sid Euclid that he was done playing around. He beat Sid Euclid to a pulp before mentioning that he was bored. Following those words, Alan Rodal called upon the power of the Black Sword to finish the duel with Sid Euclid. Sid Euclid felt a strange sensation, as if Alan Rodal's very soul was being ripped into two different people. Sid Euclid was terrified of Alan Rodal, and he kept telling himself that he would lose his life if he did not escape immediately. As the second personality inside Alan Rodal attacked him, Sid Euclid questioned his own fear and asked how it was possible for someone like him to ever run away from a pathetic fool like Alan Rodal. Sid Euclid activated the time-stop seal and a massive ice waterfall pillar which was supposed to shatter the defenses of Alan Rodal with ease. However, much to his shock, Alan easily breaks through it. Sid Euclid barely had a moment to try and guard himself again while realizing that Alan Rodal was a complete monster. He tries to subdue him again by yet again going for the ice waterfall pillar, but this was merely child's play for Alan Rodal in his current state. Sid Euclid felt a wave of shock at the sheer destructive force of a single strike while Alan Rodal began a countdown from 3 down to 0. Alan Rodal swung his blade and landed a devastating blow that obliterated the guard and left Sid Euclid bleeding and gasping for air on the ground. The dark version of Alan Rodal stepped toward the fallen Sid Euclid and promised to end his life with one simple and painless strike. As Alan Rodal prepared to finish him, he saw Leah Wisteria jump in front of Sid Euclid and pleaded for Alan Rodal to stop because she knew the real Alan Rodal was not a cold-blooded life-taker. The monstrous Alan Rodal stared down at Leah Wisteria with confusion and asked for her identity because he did not recognize her at all. Leah Wisteria told Alan Rodal her name and was heartbroken that he had forgotten her, but Alan Rodal simply warned her to move out of the way or he would strike her down too. Leah Wisteria begged Alan Rodal to remember their time together and how they had fun eating ramzak and even had their little arguments in the past. The dark side of Alan Rodal was very rude and told Leah Wisteria to be quiet because she was going to be the next one to lose her life. Leah Wisteria used all of her emotion to pretty much beg with Alan Rodal to find the kindness he used to have, and she begged him to come back to his senses. Alan Rodal struggled to transform back to normal while the voice of the soul core in his mind complained that the young boy was actually brave enough to try and take back his body. Alan Rodal refused to give up and eventually managed to return to his original form before collapsing into the waiting arms of Leah Wisteria. Leah Wisteria asked if he was alright, and Alan Rodal told her he was okay while apologizing for the way he had acted and for scaring her so badly. Alan Rodal thanked Leah Wisteria for believing in him and said it was her voice that guided him back, but then the soul core spoke one last time in his head. Alan Rodal heard the voice ask if he could hear it, and then Alan Rodal blacked out and lost all consciousness. When Alan Rodal eventually opened his eyes, he found himself in a hospital room and saw that Leah Wisteria had fallen asleep right next to his bed. Alan Rodal was confused about how he got there because his last clear memory was Sid Euclid using an ice attack before something inside Alan Rodal started to feel a wild joy. Leah Wisteria was the first to wake up, and she gave Alan Rodal a big hug because she had been incredibly stressed about his condition. Leah Wisteria then asked Alan Rodal why he was pushing against her, and Alan Rodal turned red with embarrassment because of his natural reaction to her being so close. Rose Valencia woke up right then and asked Alan Rodal for an update on his health, and Alan Rodal told her that he was feeling perfectly fine. Alan Rodal checked his body and saw that the deep wound he had received from Sid Euclid had completely vanished without even leaving a scar. Rhea Lasnote walked into the hospital room and noted that Alan Rodal seemed to be recovering well, which made Alan Rodal apologize for causing so much trouble. The girls wanted to know what happened, and Rhea Lasnote explained that the tournament ended with both schools being disqualified for breaking the rules. Alan Rodal felt very sad and blamed himself for the disqualification, but Rhea Lasnote told him it was just an unfortunate accident and not to worry. However, Rhea Lasnote informed them that the Executive Council had met and decided to ban Alan Rodal from the Academy for a full month as a penalty. Rose Valencia could not believe that Alan Rodal was being kicked out of school for a month, and Leah Wisteria confirmed that the news was true. Rhea Lasnote then dropped the news that Leah Wisteria and Rose Valencia were also being banned for the month because of collective responsibility for Alan's actions. Alan Rodal was furious and demanded to know why his friends were being punished for something they didn't do. Rhea Lasnote said the official reason was that they failed to stop Alan Rodal, but she suspected the council actually wanted to keep them away from an upcoming soul dressing class. Alan Rodal felt terrible for the girls, but they told him that his safety was the only thing that mattered, and they could even turn this break into a celebration. Rhea Lastnote admitted to the group that she might have made things worse by losing her temper with the stubborn old men on the council during the trial. Leah Visteria and Rose Valencia told Rhea Lastnote that they were not going to let her take all the blame and that they stood by Alan Rodal. Alan Rodal was worried that spending a month in the dormitory would make him rusty and ruin his physical form. Rhea Lastnote just smiled at him and said he didn't need to worry because she had a plan to turn them all into Magicaless over the next month. Following a brief recovery period, the trio met with the headmaster where Rhea Lastnote showed her joy and inquired about the physical condition of Alan Rodal. Alan Rodal gave his assurance that he was doing fine and that his medical records showed no issues, which caused Rhea Lastnote to sigh with relief at the update. Alan Rodal asked for the chance to clarify one thing because he was curious about the strange events that occurred during the Grand Festival of the Big Five. Rhea Lastnote explained the concept of the spiritual core, and she noted that she was sure Leah Visteria had already identified the phenomenon. Leah Visteria confirmed the theory and told the group that a spiritual core is a deep reservoir of soul energy found in all humans that can manifest as the spirits of ancestors or legendary beasts. Rhea Lastnote mentioned that this specific core had seized the body of Alan Rodal, and that his soul was particularly hazardous due to the immense strength of its essence. Rhea Lastnote suggested that there was no reason to panic because the massive release of energy had likely depleted the stamina of Alan Rodal, which caused him to pass out. Rhea Lastnote outlined their future and said they were required to work with the Witchblade for a month as a penalty and that their services would be unpaid. Rhea Lastnote gave them directions to the Witchblade Unification Unit located in Alesto and told them that the leader there was a longtime acquaintance of hers. The group arrived at a massive and crumbling brick structure with tiny windows, and Rose Valencia and Leah Visteria were disappointed by the derelict state of the Witchblade unit. Alan Rodal tried to lift their spirits by suggesting that the interior of the building might be more impressive than the outside looked. They stepped inside and were greeted by a crowd of rowdy people and a pungent odor which convinced Alan Rodal that their situation was quite grim. A man in the room noticed how attractive the girls were and offered them some wine, but Alan Rodal stepped in and stated they had other business to attend to. The man shouted at Alan Rodal for speaking out of turn, and he proceeded to dump his beer all over Alan Rodal. Alan Rodal kept Leah Visteria and Rose Valencia from retaliating because he was worried that any trouble they caused would reflect poorly on Rhea Lastnote. Another bystander called the man Dread and goaded him into proving his strength since the new arrivals seemed to think they were better than everyone else. Dread warned Alan Rodal that he was making a mistake if he thought he could just act superior and walk away without a fight. Alan Rodal decided he had to take action, but he kept his sword sheathed and simply gripped the handle to project a terrifying fiery aura. Alan Rodal asked if there was still an issue, and Dread immediately turned pale and apologized by saying he was just extremely intoxicated. Alan Rodal forgave the man but told him to be more careful with his drinking habits, while Dread offered to buy him something to make up for it. Alan Rodal turned down the offer and checked on his companions, and Leah Visteria confessed that the whole encounter had been a bit scary. They made their way to the front desk where they found a massive man with dark glasses who was quietly reading through a newspaper. Leah Visteria and Rose Valencia were intimidated and whispered that the man looked like a professional life-taker who had taken many lives. Alan Rodal politely greeted the man, who stood up and displayed a massive physique that reminded them of a giant mountain. The man asked if they were the new volunteers sent by Rhea Lastnote, and he mentioned that she had called him to keep an eye on her students. The man introduced himself as Darlton Bones and said he was the head of the unit and was pleased to make their acquaintance. Darlton Bones told Alan Rodal and Rose Valencia that they needed to complete their night registration while Leah Visteria was already in the system. Alan Rodal finished his paperwork and handed it back to Darlton Bones, who promised that their private information would be kept strictly confidential. Darlton Bones went to prepare their identification tokens, and the group realized that beneath his frightening exterior he was a good person. A loud shouting match started in the common area because some knights were arguing about a failed delivery order. Darlton Bones looked out and asked what the commotion was, and Rose Valencia told him that a brawl had broken out. Darlton Bones stepped into the room and asked the fighters if they had forgotten the regulations of the Alesto Witchblade Division. Darlton Bones gave the two men a severe beating and told the other knights that beer was meant for drinking and not for fighting. Darlton Bones apologized for the noise and gave the three friends their official tokens, which acted as proof of their status. Alan Rodal noticed a smear of blood on his token, and a fighter told him it was his blood that had rubbed off the hand of Darlton Bones. Alan Rodal and the girls shared a silent thought that they must never do anything to provoke Darlton Bones. Darlton Bones asked if they wanted a mission immediately and suggested that monster hunting was the best way for them to gain experience. Darlton Bones laughed and said that real men hunt monsters and that Rhea Lasnote always confused monsters with harmless moths. Leah Visteria talked about her time hunting goblins, and Rose Valencia felt confident that the three of them could defeat a chimera. Alan Rodal thought about the different creatures and felt that with his friends by his side he could handle the training and the practice. Alan Rodal picked out 3 request forms and told Darlton Bones that they were ready to take on the orders for those 3 monsters. Darlton Bones gave his approval for the hunt and wished Alan Rodal and the others the best of luck on their journey. Alan Rodal headed out on the hunting trip, and Leah Visteria asked him if he had truly never seen a real monster before in his life. Alan Rodal told her that he had only heard stories about them. They tell him how monsters were frequently found wandering along the roads. Alan Rodal explained to the girls that he was originally from a very isolated village. Alan Rodal suddenly came to a halt because he sensed something, and he told his companions that he saw a pack of goblins. Alan Rodal said they should stick to the training plan and attack the goblins directly, so the group jumped into the clearing and Alan Rodal used the first sword and flying shadow moves. A group of ogres appeared before the goblins were even finished, and Leah Visteria was the first one to charge into the fight. Leah Visteria realized that a normal sword strike would not work on an ogre, so she used her invasion style to take the monster down by herself. However, Alan Rodal steps in and ends up taking down the monster. He apologizes to Leah afterwards for taking her target. A dangerous chimera showed up right after, and the friends realized that this beast was much more powerful than the monsters they just fought. They prepared to attack the chimera together, but Alan Rodal moved with such incredible speed that he was next to the monster in the blink of an eye. Alan Rodal was surprised by how much ground he had covered, but he used the 8th sword and Yatagarasu to finish the chimera before the girls arrived. Leah Visteria was very annoyed and told Alan Rodal that she and Rose Valencia would never improve if he kept stealing all the slaves from them. Alan Rodal apologized and wondered if his new strength came from his duel with Sid Euclid or his interaction with the Soul Core. Rose Valencia said they could not let Alan Rodal run ahead anymore because they also needed to focus on training their own souls. When they got back to the unit, Darlton Bones was shocked that Alan Rodal and the girls had already defeated all 3 monsters. A week later in the tavern, Dredd called Alan Rodal over and asked him if he was in a relationship with Leah Visteria or Rose Valencia. Alan Rodal was indignant and told the knights that they had it all wrong, but the men just laughed and did not believe Alan Rodal. Alan Rodal realized that explaining was useless, and he just hoped that no one would blame him for any rumors that started. The girls appeared and asked for a new mission, so Darlton Bones gave them a simple order to guard a caravan for an old woman named Miss Shandy. Darlton Bones also gave them a personal order to research the shopping festival in Drestia because he wanted the children to have some fun. Alan Rodal thanked Darlton Bones for the opportunity, and the leader wished the friends good luck on their trip. Miss Shandy was happy to hear they were from the Thousand Blade Academy because she had a high opinion of the school and Rhea Lasnote. Miss Shandy told them that Rhea Lasnote was a famous beauty who used a fist-fighting style, and that even Ferris from the Ice King Academy could not beat her. They arrived in the city of Drestia, but Miss Shandy suddenly cried out in pain because her back was hurting her very badly. Alan Rodal told the girls to take the old woman to the hospital while he went to deliver the wheat, and they agreed to meet at the clock tower later. Alan Rodal found the shop of a man named Rocky who was very rude and did not believe that a young boy could be a magic sword. Rocky looked at the wheat and lied about the quality so that he could offer Alan Rodal only half of the original price. Alan Rodal got angry because he knew a lot about agriculture, and he insisted that the wheat was of excellent quality. Rocky ordered 2 large guards to attack Alan Rodal, but Alan easily put both of the men on the floor. Alan Rodal demanded the full price of the contract, and the terrified merchant squealed and gave him the entire amount of money. Alan Rodal left the shop and did not notice that 3 mysterious girls were watching him and planning to take his head. The 3 girls talked about finishing the job quickly so they could go home, but they were interrupted by a man called Number 18. Number 18 greeted the ladies and told them he did not mean to scare them, but the girls all activated their skills to attack him. Number 18 used his power to scatter the three girls, and then he started a long lecture about how their clothes were too vulgar and fake. Number 18 said that natural beauty was better than artificial beauty, and the girls wondered what this strange man was talking about. Number 18 remembered that Rhea Lastnote had asked him to guard Alan Rodal because she was worried about the other academy directors. Rhea Lastnote had threatened Number 18 and told him not to touch the girls or she would have to re-educate him again. Number 18 thought his job was very difficult, but he kept a close watch on Alan Rodal, who was walking through the shopping arcade. Alan Rodal looked around the Drestia festival and he had a feeling that the event was going to bring a lot of trouble. After regrouping at their scheduled destination, Alan Rodal declared that their protection detail for the merchant caravan had reached its conclusion. Leah Visteria thought back to the heartwarming gratitude Miss Shandy had shown them and agreed that the entire journey had been a complete success. Rose Valencia noted that chronic back pain was a heavy burden to bear, but her focus shifted as they entered the festival and saw the massive waves of people. The group questioned if they could actually finish their observations in one day, while the local citizens shared a laugh at the sight of the outsiders and their unusual clothing. The friends watched as a young girl showed off a fresh outfit to an older woman, who identified the beautiful local garment as a traditional yukata. Leah Visteria was instantly struck by the desire to wear one, leading the girls to head off and purchase their own versions of the local attire. When Leah Visteria and Rose Valencia eventually returned to show Alan Rodal their new look, Alan found himself completely mesmerized by them. Leah Visteria checked to see if he was impressed, and Alan Rodal told both girls they looked stunning before he took a moment to examine his own festive transformation in a mirror. Alan Rodal gave his reflection a confident wink and noted he looked quite sharp, while Rose Valencia pointed out it was time to get back to their mission. Alan Rodal asked for a plan of action, and Leah Visteria immediately shouted for the food stalls, darting through the crowds with supernatural speed. Leah Visteria piled up a mountain of snacks that nearly overran their table, and once they were full, the trio moved on to try the various festival games and hobbies. Leah Visteria dominated the shooting gallery and took every prize, and while the others were just as skilled, they decided to hand all their winnings back to the shopkeepers. They talked about how much they were enjoying the day, though one merchant was confused why they would give back everything they had rightfully won. Alan Rodal explained that the experience itself was the real prize and that they simply didn't have the space to haul all those items around. His attention was soon captured by a grand building that Rose Valencia explained was the Drestia Trading House, where the 5 great merchants were currently holding a meeting. Rose Valencia detailed how these 5 individuals possessed wealth and political influence that rivaled even the directors of the 5 elite academies. Alan Rodal finally understood the gravity of the area and asked if Rose Valencia had learned all of this from her grandfather, the legendary master of the Sakura style. A massive explosion suddenly tore through the trading house, sending the street into a state of total panic as bystanders searched for the source of the blast. Alan Rodal caught sight of several dark-clad figures sprinting away from the wreckage, and he suspected they had broken into the building to target the merchants. Rose Valencia noted the high number of casualties as a nearby man desperately called out for the arrival of knights and medical teams. The knight commander quickly gathered his men to secure the merchants, telling any capable warriors to follow him while ordering the civilians to clear the dangerous area. Alan Rodal felt he couldn't just stand by while people were in danger, so he told the girls they were going to help the knights protect the merchant leaders. The girls gave their enthusiastic approval and the 3 of them charged into the smoke and ruins of the building. Alan Rodal identified himself to the lead knight as a fellow swordsman offering aid, and the commander told them to head for the upper floors where the merchants were trapped. As they ascended, the allies witnessed the personal bodyguards of the elite merchants locked in a fierce struggle against the intruders. Alan Rodal observed that the guards were incredibly skilled and moved with a precision that was worthy of their prestigious reputation. The commander ordered the group to bypass the current skirmish and head even higher while his unit held the line against the enemies. On the next level, they encountered a bloodied knight who was rambling about his weapon being useless against the foe he had just faced. A sinister laugh echoed through the hall as they saw a hooded, masked figure standing over a pile of defeated guards, mocking their lack of spirit and demanding more excitement. The intruder noticed the newcomers and labeled them his next set of playthings, making Alan Rodal wonder about the identity of this bizarre and violent man. Suddenly, the masked stranger called Alan Rodal by his full name and asked if it was really him, which left Alan Rodal too shocked to respond. The man shouted that he would know Alan Rodal anywhere, prompting Alan Rodal to demand to know how the stranger knew him. The man acted hurt and joked about how they had shared such a close relationship in the past, a claim that completely baffled Alan Rodal. Leah Visteria and Rose Valencia stepped in front of Alan Rodal to shield him, telling him to keep moving while they took care of the lunatic. Alan Rodal agreed that they should split their forces, while the stranger warned them not to mess with him. He adds that anyone who dares disturb another person's life should just get exterminated. Alan Rodal approached one of the sets of doors, assuming the merchants were hiding inside, and found them huddled in terror the moment he entered. Alan Rodal introduced himself and stated he was there to rescue them, but one merchant scoffed and asked why a mere mercenary was here instead of their elite guards. Before Alan Rodal could defend himself, a woman named Ms. Rise laughed sophisticatedly and commented on what a cute knight he was for coming to their aid. She noted that a boy who looked so simple-minded was unlikely to be lying to them, though another merchant questioned how she could be so trusting in a crisis. Ms. Rise snapped back that they were currently defenseless because of his own cowardice and insisted they had no choice but to follow the young knight. She asked Alan Rodal to lead the way and he told her to leave everything to him, later thanking her for her support as they moved toward the exit. Mrs. Rise replied that she simply wanted to escape and noted that Alan Rodal was impressive for reaching the top floor alone at such a young age. Alan Rodal denied being alone but remained quiet as he guided them to a hidden passage that led directly to the ground floor and their waiting guards. Ms. Rise asked Alan Rodal if he wouldn't also be joining them, to which he explained that he had to go back to help his friends, so he would be leaving the merchants at the secret door. Ms. Rise promised they would see him again downstairs, and Alan Rodal sprinted back while praying that Leah Visteria and Rose Valencia were still safe. Despite his faith in their strength, Alan Rodal felt something was off as he ran back to the spot where he had left his companions. When Alan Rodal arrived, his voice failed him at the sight of Leah Visteria and Rose Valencia lying motionless on the ground with their attacker nowhere in sight. As he rushed to check on Leah Visteria, the stranger called out to him and sarcastically congratulated Alan Rodal on his return to the battlefield. The man complained that it had been boring while Alan Rodal was gone, and that his friends were too weak to even provide a decent conversation. Alan Rodal apologized to the girls for his late arrival and felt a surge of hatred toward the man for harming them so severely. The stranger exclaimed that seeing the hatred in the eyes of Alan Rodal only made him more excited, and he admitted he had been waiting a long time to cross blades again. The man asked if Alan Rodal remembered being the failed swordsman, a term that shocked Alan Rodal because it was a name only used at the Kenjutsu Academy. Alan Rodal recognized the stance as the autumn rain style, which meant his opponent was none other than Dodriel Barton. Dodriel Barton laughed at being recognized, and Alan Rodal asked what had happened to him since he had vanished after their previous duel. Dodriel Barton claimed he simply wanted to feel the love of Alan Rodal again, and explained that losing to a failure had shattered his psyche as a genius. Dodriel Barton revealed that he had purposefully left his old wounds unhealed to fuel his hatred, and that he had lived every day shrouded in anger just to take Alan Rodal's life. However, he then made a twisted claim that he eventually realized he actually loved Alan Rodal, a statement which he follows up by going into a maniacal laughter. Alan Rodal was disgusted by the nonsense gay stuff and noted the foul aura coming from Dodriel Barton's blade, which felt like a dark version of the power he had earned. Dodriel Barton said his heart was now crying with love and asked Alan Rodal if he noticed that his seemingly ordinary sword was actually a soul dressing. Alan Rodal blocked the initial rush from Dodriel Barton but felt a strange lack of recoil from the impact of their blades. Dodriel Barton used his signature autumn rain style but added a new summer rain variation, making his movements feel like those of a completely different fighter. Alan Rodal realized the initial swings were just a trap, and he was shocked that Dodriel Barton had mastered a soul dressing in such a short amount of time. Dodriel Barton mocked Alan Rodal for trying to retreat, and Alan realized he was losing his advantage because he couldn't gauge his opponent's true strength. Knowing he had to force Dodriel Barton onto the defensive, Alan Rodal turned sharply and unleashed the eighth sword, Yatagarasu. However, in a shocking twist, the attack seemingly goes through Dodriel's face without even hurting him or leaving a scratch. Dodriel Barton replied to the attack by using a serious and strong variant of his usual style called the Rain Style Storm. Overwhelmed, Alan only barely slips past it. However, it still manages to leave significant cuts on his cheek and forearm. Alan Rodal felt his blade pass through thin air and realized this intangible defense was the same trick that had neutralized Leah Visteria and Rose Valencia. Dodriel Barton mocked him with a deranged smile, describing his obsession with the beauty of agony and his hunger to cut and shred Alan Rodal's body to pieces to prove their bond. Alan Rodal refused to let the villain's insanity distract him, choosing instead to mentally dissect every anomaly in the fight to find a logical countermeasure to his style. Alan recalls what had happened during their brief exchange. Dodriel Barton had charged at him despite the fact that he had swung his sword at him. This indicated that he was confident, and must have had a reason to be so. A sudden insight struck Alan Rodal, and he accused Dodriel Barton of using the ability of his soul attire to slip into the dimension of shadows to avoid harm. Dodriel Barton confirmed the theory with a laugh, claiming that Alan Rodal was the first one to figure it out and that he was completely invincible within his shadow realm. Alan Rodal ignored the boast and focused on taking Dodriel Barton out with moves of his own. Dodred attacks him, invoking the secret autumn-style technique known as the downpour. Alan focuses all of his strength and skills to use the fifth skill, known as the world render. The attack successfully sliced through the opponent, leaving Dodriel Barton horrified that someone had managed to strike him while he was phased out of reality. Alan Rodal simply explained that if the enemy was hiding behind the curtains of the shadow world, he would just have to cut the entire shadow world apart. Alan Rodal realized that after eons of mental training in the world of time, he had finally manifested the ultimate blow capable of severing space and dimensions. Dodriel Barton admitted he had underestimated the protagonist, but claimed his time was up, vanishing into the darkness while promising a future rematch. The building began to groan under the stress of hidden explosives, which was Dodriel Barton's parting gift to take them out, forcing Alan Rodal to grab his fallen friends and make a desperate run for safety. A massive blast erupted, but Rise Dorheim appeared instantly and used her dry garden technique to snuff out the inferno before it could consume them. Rise Dorheim joked about the lack of fireworks at the festival just as Leah Visteria and Rose Valencia woke up and prepared for a fight that was already over. Alan Rodal calmed his allies by telling them the swordsman had been dealt with, and Rose Valencia acknowledged the protagonist's growing strength. Leah Visteria apologized for being a burden, but Alan Rodal was interrupted by Rise Dorheim, who asked if he was unharmed after his heroic efforts. Rise Dorheim revealed she was a prominent merchant and the owner of the Fox Shop, as well as the older sister of Ferris from the Ice King Academy. She admitted that her sister was furious over Alan Rodal's past victory, but she offered to help him one time in the future as a reward for saving her life. The merchant began to flirt aggressively with Alan Rodal until Leah Visteria and Rose Valencia pushed her away, warning her to stay away from their friend. Rise Dorheim warned the group about the Black Knights, a ruthless criminal syndicate, and cautioned them that the organization would likely seek revenge. Alan Rodal suspected he hadn't seen the last of these criminals, though he was surprised by the kindness hidden behind Rise Dorheim's eccentric personality. 3 weeks later, Mr. Bones praised the group for clearing every single request on the board and held them up as an example for the other mercenaries. As they departed the unit, Alan Rodal admitted that the life of a magic swordsman was grueling but ultimately very fulfilling. Leah Visteria and Rose Valencia agreed that the experience had been exciting and worthwhile, despite the constant threat of danger. Alan Rodal felt a wave of excitement as he prepared to return to the Thousand Swords Academy the next day to finally begin his training to master the art and gain his very own soul dressing. Rhea Lastnote greeted the group with a bright expression and praised their month of voluntary service, while noting that their time away had made them look much more courageous. She had listened to their entire story and decided with a smile to officially lift the suspension so they could finally return to their regular school life. When they walked back into the academy a short while later, Rhea Lastnote mentioned how long it had been since they last saw Class A, and Rose Valencia worried about being a month behind in their curriculum. Alan Rodal felt a deep sense of confusion and anxiety because he was incredibly nervous about meeting the other students after getting the class disqualified at the festival. Rhea Lastnote reassured him that he was not the one at fault, and Rose Valencia added that he should be less hard on himself since Sid Euclid was the first person to violate the rules. Rhea announced that the first lesson of the day would cover the soul attire technique and mentioned that the rest of the boys were likely already waiting for them in the classroom. Alan Rodal approached the door with the intent to apologize to everyone immediately, but his classmates surprised him by happily congratulating the trio on their return. One of the knights noticed the worried look on the face of Alan Rodal and asked why he was so tense after such a stunning overall success at the festival. Alan Rodal asked if they were truly not angry with him, but his peers insisted that Sid Euclid was a complete jerk who had clearly overstepped his bounds during the match. The protagonist bowed his head in a show of gratitude and apologized anyway, but his friend grabbed him in a friendly way and shouted that he should focus on telling them about his time away. Rhea Lasnote cut the conversation short to begin the lesson and revealed that the entire class had specifically asked to delay the soul attire training until Alan Rodal returned. Alan Rodal felt a mix of sadness and deep appreciation for his friends as Babel explained that they had spent the last month focusing purely on physical conditioning. To demonstrate their progress, the boys removed their shirts to show off their newly developed muscles, and the friends suggested that a duel would be the perfect way to test their growth. Rhea Lasnote told them to put their clothes back on and instructed everyone to take a spirit sword, which Alan Rodal noted was surprisingly heavy and perfect for a workout. The teacher explained that these weapons were very expensive and meant to help them listen to the spiritual core that remains dormant inside every strong swordsman. Leah Visteria gripped her weapon with a look of exhaustion, while Rose Valencia admitted she felt a strange sense of heat and excitement from just holding the hilt. It was almost like the girls were moaning sexually. Rhea Lasnote warned the class that while the core is usually an ally, it can cause terrifying nightmares for some people, and she specifically noted that Alan Rodal was at risk. She told the students to close their eyes and sink their consciousness into the soul world where they would eventually be able to see their inner core face to face. Alan Rodal entered a trance and met his inner monster, which mocked him for wanting a quiet life and insisted that he should embrace destruction and enjoyment instead. Alan Rodal refused to surrender his body to the demon and argued that their personalities were far too different for them to ever coexist in peace. The entity became furious and launched a lightning-fast strike that sent the protagonist flying backward while his arm felt like it was going to snap from the force. The monster told Alan Rodal that he must fight with the intention of dying if he ever hoped to survive the training or gain true power. Alan Rodal tried to retaliate with his 8 sword strikes, but the spirit instantly appeared behind him and slammed his face into the ground to show him that his heart was still weak. The entity took over Alan Rodal's body and was about to wreak havoc on the classroom and students alike. Rhea Lasnote intervened in the vision and used her non-sword combat skill to eliminate the threat while scolding the core for trying to take over such a weak host. When the protagonist regained his senses, he thanked Rhea Lasnote for her help, and she explained that his only hope was to maintain his original tenacity and mental fortitude. A group of aggressive students led by Reyes Valgon from the curved sword department suddenly entered the room and demanded a fight with the famous swordsman of 3 styles. The others recognized Reyes Valgon as a notorious bully from middle school and felt surprised that such a troublemaker had been admitted to the Thousand Blades Academy. Reyes Valgon mocked the protagonist by calling him a puny failed swordsman and questioned how a student who never attended a proper school could have a personal style. Alan Rodal was shocked by how much research the guy had made on him, albeit some information were still strong. Tessa stepped forward and told the intruders to shut up and stop talking about trivial things because they clearly didn't understand what really happened at the festival. Alan Rodal tried to intervene and quiet his friend, but Tessa ignored the warning and continued to challenge the intruders. Tessa asked Reyes Valgon if he had even bothered to watch the final match of the festival, but the delinquent replied with a sneer about the protagonist being a doormat. Reyes Valgon claimed that anyone watching closely could see the protagonist was a failure who had been swallowed by his own spiritual core and disqualified for breaking the rules. After labeling Tessa as worthless as his friend, the rival watched as Tessa gripped his blade and invoked the cutting iron with rust style. Reyes Valgon called Tessa a fool for playing at friendship and invited him to a duel while the students of Class A cheered for their companion to win. The fight began with Reyes Valgon launching a heavy assault, yet Tessa managed to parry the strikes and return fire with unexpected precision. Tessa began to move with minimal effort to dodge the incoming attacks, causing the protagonist to admire how much his defensive tactics had improved. Reyes Valgon mocked the lack of offensive pressure, but Tessa ignored the taunts and prepared his specialized rust-away technique. In response, the opponent summoned the 3 skeletons to the battlefield, a move that caught Tessa completely off guard. Reyes Valgon declared the match over and called down a skeleton rain that sent Tessa crashing to the floor in defeat. The students of Class A rushed to check on their fallen comrade while Reyes Valgon laughed at the lack of talent in the room. The delinquent argued that it was pathetic for Alan Rodal to hang around such weak swordsmen and claimed that Class B was now far superior. Liavisteria yelled at the boy to calm down, but he simply offered to explain why Class A was failing due to their lack of soul dress mastery. He mocked their decision to focus on physical exercise instead of soul attires, revealing that his entire group had already mastered their specialized dresses. Alan Rodal asked his classmates to look after the injured Tessa and prepared to enter the fray himself to settle the dispute. Liavisteria and Rose Valencia offered to fight by his side, but Alan Rodal apologized and requested to handle the situation alone. The girls stepped back as Alan Rodal moved to the center of the room to face the 5 laughing opponents who mocked the 1-on-5 odds. Alan Rodal ignored their ridicule and suggested they stop talking and start fighting, which the intruders accepted while calling him a rag. The protagonist struck first with a burst of incredible speed that left the Class B students completely unable to track his movements. He fought with a fierce resolve to defend the honor of his friends and refused to forgive the intruders for their insults. Alan Rodal summoned the 8th sword called Yatagarasu and neutralized all 5 of his enemies in a few swift motions. A stunned Reyes Valgon could not understand how they had lost to a swordsman who did not even have a soul dress equipped. Alan Rodal explained that even the strongest soul dress is just a useless toy if the person wearing it is an inexperienced and unconditioned fighter. He noted that their defeat was proof that they had neglected the simple but essential physical training required for true mastery. Deep inside his spirit, Alan Rodal felt an unknown power bloom and finally understood that true strength comes from the willingness to protect others. He realized this was the actual meaning of the strength of spirit that Rhea Lasnote had mentioned during their lessons. His friends erupted in screams of joy as Liavisteria praised his incredible skill and Rose Valencia gave him an impressed wink. The protagonist felt overwhelmed by the sincerity and faith his classmates showed him, and he vowed to become even more powerful for their sake. Rhea Lasnote watched the unity of her class with a silent smile while the girls reminded Alan Rodal not to push himself too hard. Later onwards, the story changes scenes to the student council, where 2 girls were reading the school newspaper and discussing the headlines. One of the headlines noted that Alan Rodal had resoundingly defeated Reyes Valgon. The student council president, Shii Arcstoria, stood by the window and contemplated the growing list of incidents involving the name Alan Rodal. She considered the rumors of his involvement in the festival explosion and admitted that his technical skill with a blade was undeniable. When her peer asked if she was interested in the boy, Shii Arcstoria admitted she was curious because she couldn't ignore someone with such a bad boy energy around him. Alan Rodal was waiting outside for Liavisteria, who eventually appeared while yawning and offering an apology for her laziness. Alan Rodal observed that she seemed exhausted, and she admitted that the intense soul attire training from the past week had made it nearly impossible for her to get a good night's sleep. Feeling self-conscious about her appearance, Liavisteria blushed and asked him not to stare at her so early in the morning, but Alan Rodal replied that her sleepy face was just as bit beautiful as it usually does. Liavisteria became completely flustered by the compliment and wondered if he always viewed her in such a romantic light, though Alan Rodal quickly tried to reassure her. As they entered the academy courtyard, they were met by a massive swarm of students who began cheering and calling them heroes of the festival. The crowd surrounded them from all directions, with various recruiters trying to convince Liavisteria to join the cheerleading squad, while others pressured Alan Rodolto to join the mountaineering club. Overwhelmed by the aggressive recruitment tactics, the 2 friends decided the only way to survive was to run away as fast as they could. They finally reached their classroom to catch their breath, where Alan Rodal remarked on how much trouble they were in while a shaken Liavisteria agreed. They found Tessa sitting near a massive pile of paper, and he explained that he had also been targeted by the relentless club barkers at the school entrance. Tessa recounted how several recruiters tried to drag him into the judo club by promising to improve his back muscles, a memory that made him shudder with fear. He informed his allies that the official recruitment period for freshmen, widely known as the rookie hunt, would last for a full week. Tessa suggested that the group should stick together for safety, while Alan Rodal noted that navigating the academy would be a difficult challenge during this time. Liavisteria admitted that while she had heard rumors about the intensity of the rookie hunt at the 5 academies, she never expected it to be this chaotic. Alan Rodal looked at the staggering mountain of leaflets on the desk and wondered which clubs had the resources to produce such a massive amount of advertising. Rose Valencia arrived shortly after, barely able to speak as she drifted toward them in a half-asleep state. Leah Wisteria warned her that being so drowsy was dangerous in the middle of a rookie hunt, and Rose Valencia asked the group if they had already picked their future clubs. Both Leah Wisteria and Alan Rodal admitted they were still undecided due to the overwhelming number of options available to them. Rose Valencia suggested that they all go out together after their lessons to explore the various club booths and see what the academy had to offer. The friends enthusiastically agreed to the plan, and as Alan Rodal looked through a few flyers, he felt excited to finally experience this aspect of student life. Rhea Lastnote entered the room to begin the day's instruction, and the students spent the next few hours focused entirely on their demanding curriculum. By the time classes ended, the trio left the room feeling completely drained from the mental and physical strain of the day. Alan Rodal noted how difficult the workload had become, and while Leah Wisteria grumbled about the constant soul dressing practice, Rose Valencia complained of being mentally exhausted. Alan Rodal reflected on his ongoing struggle with his inner entity, noting that while he still lost their battles that were being held in the soul, his reflexes and decision-making during their duels had improved significantly though. He believed that if he could eventually face the monster without sustaining a single scratch, he would finally be on the verge of manifesting his own soul attire. Leah Wisteria snapped him out of his thoughts, asking if he was even listening, while Rose Valencia suggested they begin their club tour by visiting the cheerleading squad. The group was impressed by the acrobatic skill of the cheerleaders, who performed complex somersaults while chanting praises for the Thousand Swords Academy. While Alan Rodal and Rose Valencia admired the athleticism and cool moves, Leah Wisteria felt uncomfortable with the revealing nature of the uniforms and the amount of exposed skin, although Rose Valencia thought it was cool enough. After a brief stop at the swimming pavilion and the judo club where Tessa was being recruited, the trio arrived at the kendo club and watched the members participate in a series of practical training sessions. During a scheduled break, Alan Rodal admitted that the club was far more rigid than he had hoped for, as he preferred a style of swordscraft that was more relaxed and free. Before they could leave, a girl suddenly approached and identified him as the famous Alan Rodal, expressing her excitement that such a talent was interested in her organization. Alan Rodal tried to explain that he wasn't particularly moved by what he saw, but the girl ignored his hesitation and introduced herself as Silty Rosette, the vice principal of the club. Silty Rosette immediately challenged Alan Rodal to a trial match, though Alan Rodal politely declined by explaining that they still had many other booths to visit. Undeterred by his refusal, the girl blocked their exit by summoning several translucent, faceless warriors to bar the way. Realizing she had no intention of letting him leave quietly, Alan Rodal accepted the challenge while Silty Rosette remarked that talented students were too rare to let slip away. A coach announced the start of the exhibition match between Silty Rosette and Alan Rodal, and the protagonist tried to stay positive about testing his skills against a high-ranking student. The girl suggested they use wooden practice swords and avoid using their soul shrouds, playfully promising to go easy on him during the fight. As they began, Alan Rodal carefully analyzed her stance and found that she left no obvious openings, likely due to a subtle shift in her center of gravity. Alan Rodal opened with a flying shadow strike as a distraction, which Silty Rosette blocked, only to find herself targeted by the eighth sword, Yatagarasu. Silty Rosette responded with a defensive spin style and a wind circle technique, narrowly escaping a position that would have normally ended the match. She parried his counterattack and noted that his strikes were still a bit soft, though she admitted she was surprised by his agility and technical range. Alan Rodal found himself fascinated by her unique defensive style, noting that none of his previous opponents had ever fought with such a focus on spinning and parrying. Increasing his speed and power, the protagonist pushed her to the limit, telling her to sharpen her sword skills as he unleashed a barrage of rapid-fire blows. Silty Rosette barely managed to dodge a decisive strike and called for a sudden timeout, questioning if he had been hiding his true speed during the grand festival. Alan Rodal was pleased by the compliment, and Silty Rosette admitted she needed a moment to rethink her entire strategy if she hoped to keep up with his pace. Silty Rosette gave a positive response and thanked the protagonist, but in that same moment, she clapped her hands together and collapsed to the floor. This was quite surprising considering it looked like she was going for something big. Alan Rodal felt like quite a lucky guy to have survived the encounter as the girl seemed to drift away into a daze about moonlit nights and weapon challenges. The coach rushed to her side to investigate what had happened, while Alan Rodal urged him to quickly bring over a stretcher to carry her away. Alan Rodal was officially declared the victor of the duel, and a short while later, the trio of friends gathered back in their classroom. Alan Rodal complained that the day had left him utterly exhausted, but Liavasteria praised his performance, noting that despite the constant adventures, he was doing very well. Rose Valencia asked if he had reached a final decision regarding which club to join, but he admitted that he had not found a single group that felt right for him. The girls responded with dejected voices, which surprised Alan, as he wondered if he had said something to upset them. Liavasteria suddenly suggested that they should simply establish their own organization, proposing the idea of a dedicated training club. Alan Rodal thought about it carefully and, despite some initial confusion, agreed that forming a club focused on training could actually work. Liavasteria was internally thrilled by the idea, as she saw it as the perfect excuse to spend the next 3 years right by the side of the protagonist. Rose Valencia felt equally enthusiastic, thinking that having the chance to hone her swordsmanship alongside him for 3 years was better than she ever imagined. The girls cheered and ran off to finalize the details, leaving the protagonist to wonder if they were truly that excited about the prospect of extra training. Within minutes, they returned to the classroom with official permission to open the club, announcing that Rhea Lasnote would serve as their consultant. Rose Valencia reviewed the requirements and noted that exactly 3 people were needed to launch a club, making their group a perfect fit. The paperwork was quickly organized with Alan Rodal assigned as the club director, while Liavasteria and Rose Valencia signed on as the founding members. When the group discussed what to name their new brainchild, the protagonist suggested they keep it simple and call it the Swordswining Training Club. The girls had no objections to the name, and Alan Rodal suggested they utilize a quiet corner of the schoolyard for their future practice sessions. Tessa and several other classmates happened to walk by and inquired about the gathering, prompting the friends to explain their new project. An excited Tessa immediately asked to be the first person to join the group, and soon all the other classmates expressed a desire to sign up as well. One student asked if she could balance her interest in swimming with the club activities, while Alan Rodal urged everyone not to rush until they knew the specific training regimen. Tessa wisely assumed that because Alan Rodal was the director, the club would focus entirely on sword swinging and nothing else. Liavasteria took charge and told everyone interested to write their names on the list so they could begin the registration process immediately. The crowd received the news with great delight, and it was not long before the training club officially began its first session in the schoolyard. The group stood together in silence while holding their swords, earning them a reputation among the other students as a group of weirdos doing a whole lot of nothing during recession. A special budget competition had been on the Academy's plan for quite some time, though Alan Rodal had no idea about it. His confusion left Liavasteria thoroughly surprised. The tournament rules dictated that every club select 3 representative swordsmen to fight in an elimination match to the last man standing. Rose Valencia clarified that the matches would launch the following week under a standard tournament system, ultimately deciding the grand winner and the exact funding allotted to each club. Upon reviewing the official guidelines, Alan Rodal was stunned by the massive financial disparity between finishing in first place versus landing at the bottom. Liavasteria pointed out a strict requirement demanding that first-year students be included in the lineup. Furthermore, because freshmen were required to participate, the use of specialized soul dresses was strictly banned across the board. Rose Valencia concluded that this restriction would make the event a pure exhibition of true swordscraft art. Looking over the projected figures, Alan Rodal questioned if the baseline amount was simply too small for their club's survival, suggesting it would be much smarter to secure a larger financial reserve. Liavasteria proposed a tactical workaround. They could cooperate with the other clubs to purchase bulk equipment for everyone to share, an idea Alan Rodal found brilliant. However, securing their 3 internal competitors quickly ran into roadblocks. Tessa explained that he was already locked in to represent the judo club, making him ineligible to fight for them. Another female member offered her apologies, explaining she had already committed to the swimming club's roster. Alan Rodal surveyed the room to see that only Liavasteria and Rose Valencia were available. Liavasteria noted that the situation left the 3 of them to handle the entire tournament alone, and Rose Valencia agreed that, true to form, it always came down to just the core trio. Gathering in a tight circle, the friends shouted a collective oath to give everything they had to conquer the tournament. When the day of the competition finally arrived, a dense wave of whispers rippled through the competing teams. Observing the intense surrounding behavior, Alan Rodal and his allies were taken aback. Alan Rodal remarked on how incredibly thick the tension was in the arena, prompting Leah Visteria to explain that for massive clubs with deep rosters, winning this budget was a life-or-death priority to keep their organizations running. Rose Valencia categorized the event as a desperate war zone for high-year students who possessed ultimate motivation, though Leah Visteria countered that she was simply being overly dramatic. Alan Rodal understood the stakes perfectly, recognizing that testing their skills against super-strong upperclassmen who refused to hold back would serve as phenomenal combat practice. The stadium speakers crackled to life as the host officially declared the club budget competition open, announcing that the opening ceremonies would be spearheaded by last year's grand champion, Student Council President SHII Arcstoria. As the young woman stepped onto the stage to greet the assembly, Alan Rodal leaned over to ask Leah Visteria if this chairman was truly as formidable as rumors suggested. Leah Visteria confirmed it without a second thought, stating that the leaders of all 5 academies were absolute beasts, and it was no exaggeration to call her the single strongest swordsman in the entire school. Rose Valencia chimed in with a staggering detail. SHII Arcstoria had actually won the title as a mere first year the previous year, utterly dismantling a seasoned third year from the elite swordscraft club. It had been an absolute, flawless victory, and the 2 assistants standing directly behind her today were handpicked by the chairman herself as some of the strongest in swordscraft too. Alan Rodal quietly resolved that he wanted to see their swordsmanship firsthand. Up on the podium, SHII Arcstoria concluded her brief formal address and officially commenced the games. Before long, Alan Rodal's companions went into battle. The 2 girls performed absolute miracles, showcasing flawless mastery of their personal styles across every single match. Watching closely from the sidelines, Alan Rodal monitored their tactical progression. Their vanguard, led by the fierce Leah Visteria, and their main force, anchored by Rose Valencia, tore through the competition at a rapid pace. Alan Rodal sat out every early round entirely, patiently biding his strength for the ultimate showdown. Following yet another decisive victory, Leah Visteria gleefully noted that their tiny training club had successfully surged to the front ranks, and Rose Valencia added that it was a flawless start. Alan Rodal had never doubted them for a moment. Their absolute mastery of fundamental sword techniques gave them a massive edge, and the universal ban on soul dresses played directly into their hands. Leah Visteria finally announced that the championship matches were about to begin, prompting Alan Rodal to stand up and declare that it was time to move. The stadium announcer boasted that the best of the best were taking the stage for the final clash, dramatically introducing the training club as a mystical group of warriors who practiced in a forgotten corner of the schoolyard, a sudden dark horse in the tournament. Alan Rodal cringed inwardly, wondering what kind of embarrassing introduction the school had cooked up for them. The host shifted focus, introducing their final opponents, the absolute reigning champions of the Thousand Swords Academy, the elite student council. Operating as their vanguard was the council secretary Lilim Corrine. Holding down the main force position was their accountant, Tirith Magdareth, and serving as the absolute general was President SHII Arcstoria herself. The host then called the vanguard fighters, Leah Visteria and Lilim Corrine, to take their places on the arena floor. Alan Rodal and Rose Valencia wish her the best of luck as Leah steps into battle. The host confirmed both sides were set, and the vanguard duel erupted. Leah Visteria initiated a fierce opening assault, but despite her incredible efforts, her opponent proved too formidable, and she suffered a definitive loss. Immediately following, the main force match concluded with Tirith Magdareth securing a win, officially crowning the student council as the budget champions once again. SHII Arcstoria warmly praised her teammates' flawless execution. Lilim Corrine casually dismissed the match as a walk in the park, but Tirith Magdareth countered that the bout had actually been incredibly close, openly questioning if their opponents were truly just first-year students. Meanwhile, a disheartened Leah Visteria approached her friends to apologize for the loss. Rose Valencia reassured her that it was merely a stroke of bad luck, and Alan Rodal insisted there was no reason to sweat the outcome. Landing in second place was an incredible milestone, even if he felt a lingering pang of regret over missing his chance to cross blades with the president. Just as the host prepared to transition into the official awards ceremony, Shii Arcstoria unexpectedly interjected, addressing the entire crowd. She noted that while the official team placements were decided, the tournament felt somewhat incomplete since neither she nor Alan Rodal had actually stepped onto the field. To rectify this unfairness, she boldly proposed a final, decisive captain's match. Alan Rodal was thrilled by the turn of events, having given up all hope for such an opportunity, especially since he desperately wanted to test his limits against the chairman. He openly thanked Shii Arcstoria for her sportsmanship, and she eagerly welcomed the challenge. The training club girls immediately grew anxious for their leader. Leah Visteria begged him to be careful, and Rose Valencia reiterated that the student council elite operated on an entirely different level of strength. Alan Rodal thanked them for their concern, reassuring them that he understood the stakes completely. As Alan stood in front of her, Shii states how she heard a lot of problematic things about Alan, but from his look, she can tell that he was kind. Knowing he was facing one of the very best, Alan Rodal seized the initiative, executing an aggressive opening strike using his first sword technique, Flying Shadow. However, Shii manages to block it by using her own attack, which blurs his vision. She immediately follows it up with an attack of herself, which pushes Alan back. Shii notes that she heard about Alan's self-taught status, and she praises him for being able to dodge her attacks. Alan understands that Shii isn't like others, and that she is capable of using her attacks to create smooth patterns to open up his defense. Meanwhile, Shii kept taunting him and asked him to do his best, because there was no way that this was all he had to offer. Alan took on her offer and charged at her. He knew he couldn't beat her when it came to fundamentals, so he had to outspeed her. Alan went on the assault with his fabled cherry blossom style and tried to catch Shii off guard. Shii acknowledges Alan's sudden charge of pressure, but points out that despite his speed, his attacks were too straightforward. However, the attack was simply a decoy from Alan to distract her and attack her from behind. Just as he is about to hit her with the fifth style, Shii Arcstoria uses a kick to block the attack. She praises the idea, but explains that it's simply too slow to work effectively on her. Shocked, Alan couldn't believe she had seen through the sole weakness in his style so quickly. Shii Arcstoria tells Alan to try something new in a mocking way, forcing him to go all out. As his teammates watched in tension, Alan noted how all of his attacks were getting blocked by Shii Arcstoria. However, instead of being frustrated, Alan loved every moment of it, because it showed him how much growth there is for him to make. In a trance, he keeps attacking her, hoping she'd keep blocking and give it back to him. He was praying for this fight to continue forever. However, one strike unexpectedly goes in a bit too strong, and it breaks Shii Arcstoria's sword. She stared blankly at her broken hilt, deeply shocked. Alan Rodal was equally stunned by the sudden resolution of the match, quickly checking to see if she had sustained any injuries. Letting out a heavy sigh, the president conceded that there was no helping the situation. With a broken sword, she had no choice but to forfeit the match. The entire audience erupted into absolute shock over the sudden downfall of the undefeated Shii Arcstoria. The host officially crowned Alan Rodal the grand victor of the match. Leah and Rose immediately ran up to Alan to celebrate his victory. They both praise him for getting the job done. Alan Rodal checked his own internal state, completely unable to process the strange sensation that had overtaken him during that final clash. Meanwhile, the student council members attended to Shii Arcstoria, asking if she was okay, because it seemed like he would cut her in half. She told them she was okay, while cooking up something in her mind. A little later, the training club members were having lunch in the academy dining hall when Shii Arcstoria suddenly showed up and asked to speak with Alan Rodal. Caught off guard, Alan stared at the chairman in surprise. Shii apologized for interrupting his meal, but the other students immediately started whispering, wondering why the legendary president was personally looking for the academy's most infamous troublemaker and what he'd done this time. Shii told Alan to come with her to the student council room right away. Alan suggested he could stop by after lunch, but she firmly insisted on going now. With no real choice, he agreed. As they left, Leah Visteria urged Rose Valencia to follow them, but Rose said they should at least finish eating first. Once they arrived at the student council room, Shii asked Alan if he knew why she'd called him there. Alan guessed it was about the budget competition. Staring directly at him, Shii demanded to know if he'd been holding back during their duel from the very beginning. Alan quickly insisted he'd fought with everything he had, but she immediately called him out for lying. She demanded an explanation for the mysterious power that had shattered her sword. Dropping his guard, Alan admitted the truth. He had no idea what happened either. He explained that it hadn't felt like his own strength at all, but rather some strange force acting through him. Shii's expression changed as she solemnly declared that he had left a deep emotional scar on her, meaning he was now obligated to take responsibility. Alan immediately panicked, thinking he'd seriously injured her somehow, and desperately asked what he could do to make it right. Smiling brightly, Shii said the solution was simple. Then her smile vanished as she revealed her real demand. Because he had humiliated her in front of the entire academy, he would have to join the student council as a public figure. Alan was completely stunned and couldn't understand how breaking her sword had somehow led to mandatory council service. Shii argued that her flawless reputation had been damaged because of him. Alan strongly objected, pointing out that he was already busy running the training club. At that moment, Tirith Magdareth and Lilim Corrine stepped in and started pressuring him. They asked if he seriously intended to reject an offer from someone as skilled as Shii Arcstoria and abandon his responsibilities to the academy. Alan quickly realized the conversation had turned into outright blackmail. Shii calmly reassured him that his duties with the training club wouldn't change at all. As a public figure, he'd barely have any actual work to do. The only requirement was attending the student council's daily lunch meetings. She explained that the council wanted him because his self-taught fighting style brought prestige to the academy, then asked if he was ready to join. Alan started politely thanking her for the offer, but before he could finish rejecting it, the doors suddenly burst open. Leah Visteria and Rose Valencia charged into the room and boldly declared that they wouldn't let the student council steal their club chairman away. Alan was completely caught off guard. Shii calmly recognized them as members of the training club. Leah loudly insisted that Alan belonged to their club and that she'd fight to keep him there. Shii winced slightly and said they were making a huge fuss over nothing. She repeated that Alan only needed to spend lunch with the student council. Leah immediately rejected the idea, claiming Alan was already obligated to eat lunch with them every day. Rose firmly agreed, saying she wouldn't let the council take those precious moments away from them. Shii fell silent for a moment before nodding. She said she finally understood what was really bothering them. Then she instantly switched tactics and offered both girls a place on the student council alongside Alan. The invitation completely stunned Leah and Rose. Shii continued pressing her advantage, explaining that the council always needed more public figures and she'd be happy to have them. She went on to describe the perks: lavish banquets funded by the academy several times each month and fully funded training camps during school vacations. She then asked if they really wanted to miss out on all those benefits while Alan enjoyed them without them. To finish her pitch, she casually mentioned that the upcoming summer trip would be held at a luxury resort where everyone would spend their days training and relaxing in swimsuits. Turning back to them, Shii asked if they were ready to sign up. Alan looked at his friends in confusion, wondering why they'd suddenly frozen in place. Then, breaking their silence, both girls completely reversed their positions and started begging him to accept the offer. They were utterly captivated by everything Shii had described. Alan could hardly believe what he was hearing. Turning to Shii, he asked what kind of dark magic she'd used to brainwash them. Shii simply laughed and said she'd only explained the facts of the position. Finally, she asked Alan for his answer. Looking at the pleading puppy dog eyes of Leah and Rose, Alan realized he'd been thoroughly defeated by his own teammates. Accepting that resistance was pointless, he officially agreed to join the student council. Everyone celebrated the decision, but Lilim Corrine leaned over with a smirk and warned Alan that his future was going to be exhausting. After all, he was destined to face endless trouble because of the women in his life. The updated student council gathered for their next meeting to get acquainted. Lilim Corrine introduced herself first as the student council secretary, a second year from Group A. The second girl was Tirith Magdareth, the council accountant, also a second year from Group A, who asked for their love and favor. The third to introduce herself was Shii Arcstoria, a fellow second year from Group A, who suggested they work together and have fun. The friends then introduced themselves one by one. Shii Arcstoria explained that because she had transferred most of her authority to her deputy, they didn't have much actual work to do. Lilim Corrine added that the only thing they really did during regular meetings was eat lunch together. Shii Arcstoria went on to explain that her vice president was currently abroad due to a loss. Alan Rodal asked if she was referring to the same vice president who had been exiled from the country, and she confirmed that he was now illegally staying in the sacred empire of Rieria. The group was amazed, wondering how that was possible since Rieria was a dangerous empire known for dark magic. Shii Arcstoria replied that when they were deciding his punishment, she had jokingly mentioned wanting a blood diamond, which could only be found there. To her surprise, he actually went to get one, making her think of him as a fool. After a brief silence, Tirith Magdareth announced that they had decided on the location for their summer trip. Lilim Corrine excitedly told Alan Rodal that he would be surprised to learn it was a resort on Mount Veneria where celebrities vacationed. Tirith Magdareth complained that Lilim was stealing her lines, but Lilim ignored her and added that they had hosted a barbecue at the villa there last year. Tirith finally managed to point out that the most important feature was the private beach beside the villas. Alan admitted he had never seen the sea before. The group was surprised, and he explained that he grew up in a mountainous region and had never had the opportunity. Shii Arcstoria gave him a playful wink and asked if seeing the sea for the first time would help him relax. For some reason, Lia Visteria and Rose Valencia immediately blushed, something Alan quickly noticed. Changing the subject, Shii Arcstoria asked whether everyone was preparing for exams. Alan and Lia said they were doing fine, but Rose shocked everyone by admitting she wasn't studying at all. Rose defended herself by explaining that she came to Thousand Swords Academy solely to perfect her one-handed cherry blossom sword style and had little interest in the rest of the curriculum. Tirith Magdareth warned her that failing the exams meant attending extra classes throughout summer vacation, which would prevent her from going to the resort. Rose immediately turned pale. From then on, Alan and Lia drilled her with past exam papers until test day finally arrived. Rose confidently declared that she had never lost before and knew her friends would always help her. Sometime later, the school returned the test papers. Looking over the results, Lia asked Alan how he had done. Alan replied that he had done well, but pointed out that Lia had achieved the highest scores in every subject. When asked about her own results, Rose proudly announced that she had passed the minimum threshold. Her friends congratulated her, and she sincerely thanked them for all their help. Lia happily declared that they could now all attend the summer training camp together. Meanwhile, Alan privately wondered why they were heading to Shii Arcstoria's house the next day instead of the airport. The next day, everyone gathered at the Academy Hall and traveled to the Arcstoria estate. Upon arrival, Alan was stunned by the sheer size of the property. Lia explained that considering Shii Arcstoria's status, it wasn't surprising. The Arcstoria family was one of the most famous lineages in the country, with members holding important government positions. She added that if Alan paid attention to the news, he would already know that. Laughing, Alan replied that he was far removed from such interests. At that moment, Shii Arcstoria called everyone over and greeted them. She then asked Alan what he thought of her outfit. When he replied that it suited her very well, she happily thanked him and invited everyone outside. Parked in the open area was a massive private airplane. Alan stared in amazement. It was the first airplane he had ever seen in person. He soon learned that it belonged to the Arcstoria family. Lia asked whether only student council members were attending the camp. Shii replied that the advisor would arrive a little later before encouraging everyone to board and stop chatting. After some time, they landed at a southern seaside resort on Mount Venus. The moment they stepped outside, the group was captivated by the endless blue ocean. Lia pointed out the scenery to Alan, who immediately realized that this was the endless sea his mother had once described to him. He let out a breath of admiration. Shii announced that they should first clean up the villa. When the others offered to help, she firmly refused, insisting that there were already enough people for the task. Lilim knew the real reason. Shii's room was apparently a complete disaster, with underwear scattered everywhere. Instead, Shii suggested that everyone relax on the beach. Alan happily agreed. After spending some time by the shore, they headed to the villa and received a warm welcome. Lia was amazed by its size, while Rose commented on how luxurious everything looked. When they spotted several watermelons hanging in a net, they asked about them and learned about a traditional game where a blindfolded player has to locate and smash a watermelon. Leah thought it sounded fun and suggested they try it later. Without warning, a group of hostile men stormed into the villa, and their leader immediately seized Leah Wisteria by the arm. Alan Rodal and the others rushed to help her, but the man shoved Alan aside and barked at the boy to stay out of his way. The group quickly gathered into a defensive circle, standing back to back while Alan estimated there were around 20 enemies surrounding them. When Alan demanded to know who they were, the leader declared that they didn't need introductions because the princess was going to lose her life there and then. Rose instantly struck first with her special style, before suggesting they take things outside. Once outside, the gang leader stepped in front of them, blocking their path and ordering his men to surround the group. The attackers rushed forward. Leah responded with the hegemonic style. Rose unleashed her one-handed cherry blossom style. Alan followed with a powerful Yatagarasu strike before using Sakura Flash. Together, they quickly defeated the attackers. The leader groaned in frustration about losing to a bunch of brats. Seeing that the enemies could no longer fight, Alan told Rose to contact the Holy Knights while he checked on Leah. Leah asked if she had been the target. Alan confirmed it, pointing out that they had specifically mentioned a princess. However, to everyone's surprise, the defeated enemies began getting back to their feet. Through gritted teeth, the leader muttered that he would take them out. One of his comrades questioned whether he had lost his mind. The leader replied that they had already failed their mission and would be executed by their superiors anyway, so taking a desperate gamble was their only option. As Alan wondered what he was talking about, the leader swallowed a pill and shouted that they were all doomed. Immediately afterward, the entire group began transforming into monsters. Alan realized that every one of them possessed a soul dress. Leah noted that their behavior was extremely strange, while Alan pointed out how unstable their soul dresses appeared. The leader then launched an attack so powerful that it blasted away the entire sandy beach. Alan couldn't comprehend where such overwhelming strength had come from. Leah quickly intercepted the attack with Fafnir. As Alan prepared to support her, a group of monsters charged toward them screaming that everyone would lose their life. Noticing the dramatic increase in the leader's physical abilities, Alan watched as the man ordered his followers to take the princess' life. Leah Wisteria tried to get out, but the leader caught hold of her leg and screamed that killing her would save them. Leah immediately yelled at him to let go. At that same moment, the strongest monster launched an attack. Warning Leah about the danger, Alan threw himself in front of her and shielded her with his own body. Suddenly, an enormous wall of ice appeared around them. The group stared in confusion, wondering where it had come from. The furious leader repeatedly tried to break through it, but every attempt failed. Then someone appeared. Using an ice spear-style technique, the newcomer wiped out the remaining enemies in a single strike and shattered the ice barrier. The group was shocked to see Sid Euclid standing there. Looking completely unfazed, he casually asked if they were really struggling against opponents he considered small fish. Everyone was stunned, both by his sudden appearance and by his description of the monsters. A moment later, Ferris appeared and complained that Sid's freezing powers were ruining the tropical atmosphere she had been looking forward to enjoying. Sid simply apologized. Alan wondered why students from Ice King Academy were there, and Ferris quickly noticed the question written across his face. With a laugh, she explained that their own student council was holding a summer training camp at the same resort. Confused, Alan guessed that Sid was her subordinate. Sid immediately asked whether there was a problem with that assumption. Alan replied that he simply hadn't expected it. Ferris laughed again and remarked that Sid was a little crazy. Sid protested that he wasn't stupid. Ferris reassured him by calling him cute. Watching the exchange, Alan found himself wondering what kind of relationship the two actually had. Just then, a helicopter arrived. Rhea Lastnote stepped out alongside her assistant, number 18. Alan was surprised to see her there. Rhea asked everyone how they were enjoying their time at the resort. Leah then asked whether she was the advisor to the student council. Rhea admitted that she had been unbearably bored and had essentially run away, using the trip as an excuse. When she noticed Ferris, she immediately asked what she was doing there. Ferris responded by asking the exact same question and complained about having to look at Rhea's awkward face during her vacation. Annoyed, Rhea demanded to know what the humanoid fox had just said. At that moment, Rose returned accompanied by a squad of holy knights. Their captain proudly announced that they had arrived to rescue everyone from danger, only to discover that the battle was already over. Realizing this, he immediately called for a rescue team instead. Rose apologized for her delay, explaining that she hadn't realized how far away the Holy Knight's office was. Alan thanked her and assured her that it wasn't a big deal. Rose then asked why members of Ice King Academy were present. Alan simply replied that a lot had happened. Nearby, one of the knights examined a pill and was shocked to see a soul crystal pill. After realizing what it was, he immediately ordered his men to contact the high-ranking Holy Knights at headquarters. Alan finally understood that the soul crystal pills were responsible for both the dramatic increase in the enemy's physical abilities and the instability of their soul dresses. At the same time, he couldn't stop thinking about one important detail. Leah had clearly been their target. Not long afterward, Shii Arcstoria and the others arrived and asked what had happened. After Alan briefly explained everything, Shii smiled. Inspired by the unusual situation, she proposed an interesting idea. Why not hold a joint summer training camp together with Ice King Academy? After a while, Alan Rodal thought to himself how a training camp with the Ice King Academy might turn out overly chaotic. However, that wasn't the thing on his mind. Instead, he was worried about the people who attacked Leah Visteria and why they might have decided to do so. Alan deduces that it must have been the work of the enemy of Visteria, because at the end of the day, Leah is a princess. Just then, the girls come to him wearing their swimsuits and ask him how they were looking. Alan was taken aback and told them they were all looking fine. However, the girls, particularly Shii Arcstoria, began to tease his control even more by being seductive. Eventually, they get ready to go out and enjoy their training camp. Once outside, Alan is greeted by an overly enthusiastic Cain Material, whom he had previously defeated in the Holy Festival. Cain, though, was now a fan and was borderline worshipping Alan. Confused, Alan asked Sid Euclid what was wrong. Sid initially refused to talk to Alan, but eventually explained the matter to him. After the festival loss, Cain was hit hard, so he used his own Centurion sword to cut himself. This put him in the 100-year confinement, but he wasn't able to tolerate the torture and pain. So, ever since then, he had been acting like this. After a while, Rhea and Ferris asked the students to gather together. Rhea last note revealed that she and Ferris have figured out some beach-related activities for them to train in. This stunned her students because for once in her life, Rhea was working. Regardless, the two camps were supposed to play some beach-related games, which immediately brought out the competitive fire between Ferris and Rhea, as they argued on whose team was going to win. The first game was beach volleyball. Leah and Alan from Thousand Blades Academy on one side, Sid and Cain from Ice King Academy on the other. With both sides cheering their players on, the match began. And soon enough, the game was on match point and Alan had the chance to win it with his service. Alan delivers a tricky serve, which is saved well by Sid. This allowed Cain to set up a subsequent spike for Sid, which he smashes down with his special ability. Alan counters it using Shii Arcstoria's Cloudy Sky technique, which results in the ball going back to the other side and dropping, giving Thousand Blades Academy the win. After that, they competed in a beach flag race, but this time Sid was a bit too fast. Alan was taken aback by his quickness, and even though he tried his best to accelerate, he ended up falling a bit short. Sid was the victor, and he was celebrated by his classmates who thought it was impressive. However, Sid was taken aback by how Alan had gotten fast enough to almost catch him in speed despite starting late. He wonders if Alan had gotten so strong thanks to the monster inside of him. Later that night, Alan came back to the resort, feeling tired. He enjoyed the various competitions they competed in. Even though he is the type who likes training by himself, he thinks training with others isn't bad either. Just then, he opens the door to his room to see Shii and Leah waiting eagerly for him. They were both acting weird, and upon inspecting the area, Alan noticed that they probably had champagne truffles. Naturally, the girls were affected by it, and it got them all excited. They started to make a move on Alan. They hold a hand each and start rubbing. Soon, they push him down and get on top of him while letting their robes down. Just when it was looking like the two girls were going to have their way with Alan, They both dozed off at the same time. Alan manages to get away and meets Rose Valencia, who was also in the room. Scared, Alan asked if she was drunk too. Rose said yes, but because she came from a heavy drinking family, she is actually able to handle alcohol quite well. The same can't be said for the others though. Regardless, Alan asks Rose if Leah would be alright considering all the things that had happened to her earlier. Rose mentions that she is probably a bit shook up from what happened, such was the nature of it all. But she reckons Leah will be fine. Alan adds that he would like to help her as a friend in some way, something Rose agrees with. After everyone falls asleep, Alan decides to head for his room as well, but he runs into Rhea Lastnote, who was waiting for him. Alan was taken aback, so Rhea apologized for coming to him so late at night, but she wanted to talk about something serious. They go inside his room, where Rhea states that she wants to talk about the stuff that happened with Leah Vestiria today. She says that it must have been the work of either the Ronellian or the Obsidian Kingdoms, and that an operation to find out is going on. But more importantly, Rhea states that all the assassins the Holy Knights arrested were attacked and compromised on the way. By the time they found the bodies, they were burned to ashes. Rhea reckons that the assassin who took those guys out probably wanted to erase the signs of the soul crystal pills. She thinks that they've used the guys as pawns to get Leah Vestiria and use her as a test subject to measure just how strong the soul crystal pills can be. Alan Rodal finds it crazy how they are using human lives as pawns, but Rhea warns him about it and tells him to beware. Alan asks her why she was telling this to him only, and not others. Rhea tells him not to dig too deep into this. It's a decision made by adults, and they told him because they think he is the right person. So, the least he could do is know his role and shut his mouth. The next day, the little games between the two academies continue on as normal. Both sides trade wins, and come the last day, the academies were tied on points. Despite that, the decision was made to enjoy the final day instead of practicing and competing. Alan felt a bit melancholic, because the camp was ending too soon. Just then, the two girls from Ice King Academy come over to talk to him. They mention how they find him cool for being able to go head-to-head with Sid. They say they've been checking him out for a while and start feeling up his muscular body. Alan is taken aback by this, but he can't lie about disliking it. Luckily, Leah and Rose intervene and push the girls away. The girls subsequently take their man and go to play in the water. And just like that, they have tons of fun on the last day of their camp. For lunch, Ferris invites Thousand Blades Academy to their resort. They go inside and find that they've prepared tons of good food for them. They get ready to eat, but just when Leah is about to eat it, Sid snatches away the fish from her. This upsets Leah, but Sid points out how that fish was poisonous and that it could cost her life immediately. This shocks Ferris, as she did get the food checked by a specialist earlier. Sid tells no one to eat before he approves of it and starts checking everyone's food. Alan learns that Sid has lived a rural life, so he has impeccable survival instincts. Alan finds this fascinating. After having lunch there, they decide to try barbecue outside for dinner. They enjoy their barbecue dinner in the moonlight. Alan, Rose, and Leah promise each other to come back again next year for their training camp. Things ended on a nice note on their last night, but in the morning, before leaving, the two leaders once again clashed over supremacy. They couldn't accept a tie. SHII inserts herself as the voice of reasoning and asks them to wait for the Sword Master Festival to settle the score. The Sword Master Festival is the event where all academies compete for bragging rights, so there is no better place to break the tie. Alan Rodal excitedly agrees to it. Sid Euclid also agrees, but in a surprising moment, he also shows excitement and tells Alan that he will pay him back for earlier by beating him. Until then, he asks him to stay undefeated. This stuns his classmates, as Sid usually never talks so normally and with such enthusiasm. After some more tomfoolery, it was finally time for them to head their separate ways. Just as they are about to board the plane, Alan finds a peculiar-looking young man who is wearing knight-like clothes. Without saying anything, the man attacks Alan with the hegemonic style of the Vestiria. Alan is pushed away, as the guy secures Leah and asks him just what he was doing with Her Majesty. Shocked, they ask Leah who this guy was. Leah introduces him as Claude Stroganoff, the captain of the Royal Guard of Vestiria. Claude was still being nice to Leah, but he confronted Rhea aggressively, asking how she could let a swine like Alan come close to Leah. Rhea tells him to calm down before explaining that those two already have a special relationship. Stunned, Claude questions if they are in a romantic entanglement. Rhea replies by saying it's not like that. Instead, Leah is his slave and Alan is her master. This stuns Claude, and he refuses to believe it. So he asks Leah for confirmation. Alan was hoping that she would just lie about their thing, which was already stupid, to help ease the situation. But a flustered Leah fails to lie and admits it. This stuns Claude, and he collapses in shock. They quickly attend to him, and upon waking up, Claude promises to make Alan's life a living hell for what he has done to the princess. Claude then reports this to Leah's father, the king of Vestiria. The king was shocked to learn that some commoner had deflowered beloved daughter. He, Vestiria, orders Claude to bring Alan to him, so that he can slay him with his own hands. As Alan and Leah arrive at the capital of the kingdom of Vestiria, they are greeted by the king's people. Leah sighed, as she had forgotten about how she is treated in this kingdom. Leah apologized to Alan for the unnecessary rituals, but Alan told her it was fine. Alan's face had turned white from stress, so Leah pointed out how his face didn't say he was fine. Alan had no idea about the kind of news Claude had delivered to the king, but he could tell that the king was full of pure anger in that letter he sent to invite them. Leah Vestiria was also stressed out about this matter. After all, her father had explicitly told her to bring Alan to him. Alan accepted that there was nothing to be done now. Leah's father was the king after all. He hoped that when they open up about everything to him, he would be understanding. The escort lady informed them that their carriage had arrived and told Leah to be careful when getting on it. After Leah gets on, they begin to move. Alan could feel the negative feelings they have about him just from the way they looked at him. He was deeply worried, wondering if everything he'd be fine. After some time, they arrived at the kingdom. They approached the castle and Alan was taken aback by how big it was. The guards at the gate declared that their princess had returned and asked for the gates to be opened. They went inside the kingdom and everyone began to respectfully greet the princess, as she had returned after a while. However, the guards looked at Alan piercingly. It naturally made Alan curious as to why they were eating him alive with their eyes. Once they entered the castle, Alan was once again surprised by the extravagant nature of the decoration and how big the place was. He understood that this was an entirely different world from his own. Leah looked around, bringing up how she still felt homesick despite only being away for 3 months. Alan questioned if she spent her entire childhood inside these walls, which amused Leah. She laughed, remembering how she used to cause chaos running around the castle as a kid. Alan cracked a smile, saying that actually tracked perfectly. She playfully questioned if he was insulting her, but Alan just flipped it back on her, asking what she thought. The mood shifted when the attendant cut in, letting them know they were being taken to the king's room. She dropped a warning, telling them to stay on their best behavior. This completely threw Alan off. He was clueless when it came to royal etiquette. In his mind, a single slip of the tongue could blow up into a massive political crisis. Leah could tell he was spiraling and immediately reassured him. She reminded him that he came here as her guest, so he didn't need to stress. Alan appreciated her looking out for him. He locked it in, deciding he'd just play it safe and stay as respectful as possible. The friends stepped into the throne room, finding King Vestiria waiting for them. The moment he acknowledged his daughter, a heavy silence filled the room. Just from his posture alone, you could easily tell this man held absolute power. But the tension melted away when Gree broke into a smile, welcoming Leah back home. Leah returned the greeting, and the king confessed how deeply he had worried over her safety. Seeing this warm exchange completely put Alan at ease. He realized his mental image of a ruthless ruler was totally wrong, and that the king was really just a doting, protective father. Alan relaxed, thinking this was his chance to make a good impression and say something respectful. Leah stepped forward to introduce him, but Alan decided to take the initiative. He gave a polite greeting, introducing himself as a freshman from the Thousand Blades Academy. Instantly, the king's expression turned ice cold. The warmth vanished from his eyes as he demanded to know if Alan was that exact same wicked brat. The sudden shift completely caught Alan off guard. He stood there in pure confusion, wondering how the entire room had just turned completely hostile in a split second. Gree didn't hold back, bringing up how Claude had already filled him in on everything. He accused Alan of completely corrupting his daughter, twisting her mind and her body, before trash-talking him as a repulsive, shameless punk. Alan tried to cut in and clear the air, telling the king it was all a giant misunderstanding, but the king shut him down instantly. Gree kept up the aggressive rant, claiming Alan had played Lia with slick words and hands that couldn't keep to themselves. He called him a straight-up fraud, boasting that his age meant he could see right through a slick liar. Alan was completely floored by how much that snake Claude had twisted the facts. Lia finally snapped. She lost her temper and demanded her father actually sit back and listen to Alan's side of the story. But Gree doubled down, insisting this devilish brat had somehow bewitched his perfect daughter and that he wasn't about to get played. Lia kept fighting back, trying to make him see that Alan wasn't that type of guy at all, but Gree scoffed, claiming the boy had totally brainwashed her. Lia yelled that he had it all completely backwards. The king dismissed the whole thing as a waste of breath anyway, muttering that Alan's sword skills were probably completely subpar. Alan tried to get everyone to take a breath and relax, but his voice was completely drowned out. Lia kept going toe-to-toe with her father, warning him not to talk trash about things he didn't understand because Alan was a beast on the battlefield and had even taken her down in a match. Gree shrugged it off, claiming Alan probably just cheated to get that win. Surprisingly, Lia stumbled over her words and accidentally agreed that maybe he really did cheat to win, leaving Alan completely speechless as he wondered whose side she was even on. Lia quickly recovered anyway, doubling down that no matter what, Alan was the real deal. Gree went quiet for a second, mulling it over. He decided that if she was going to hype him up that much, he'd personally test the boy's spine and see if he actually had the guts of a true swordsman. He gave an ultimatum. He'd overlook this whole mess and declare Alan the absolute strongest in the realm, but only if he could survive a duel against a swordsman of his own choosing, someone right around Alan's age. The king dropped a heavy ultimatum, stating that if Alan fell in battle, Lia's overseas studies would be cut short on the spot, and she'd be banned from ever stepping foot in the academy again. Alan ran the words through his head, the harsh reality sinking in that he might lose his classmate for good. Lia completely lost it, refusing to accept such a ridiculous trap, but her father barked at her to pipe down, enforcing his absolute authority as a parent who wouldn't tolerate any backtalk. While Lia glared at her father in pure rage, Alan couldn't help but feel a wave of regret, thinking that if he had just turned down her invitation to come to this place, none of this drama would have kicked off. Gree turned his gaze back to Alan, pressuring him for an answer. He threw a sharp taunt, warning him that victory was impossible and mocking him by asking if packing his bags and running away with his tail between his legs wouldn't be the smarter move. But Alan knew how badly Lia wanted to finish her education, and deep down, he simply wanted to stay by her side. Alan took in all of this information, locking his gaze with the king. He calmly stated that he got the picture, accepted to take on the fight and prove himself worthy. Lia's face instantly lit up with relief, but Gree just scoffed, telling him he was making the absolute biggest mistake of his life. The king then announced the schedule, setting the stage for 10 a.m. the following morning at the Grand Arena, where Alan would have to run a gauntlet against 3 different fighters. He asked if Alan had any complaints, while Lia stood by, stressing out because there was officially no turning back from this life-changing match. Alan looked him straight in the eye and shrugged it off, stating he had zero objections since winning was the only outcome anyway. Gree was actually quite amused by the boy's insane confidence. He acknowledged that his mental fortitude wasn't half bad before ordering Claude to clear him out of the throne room and escort him straight to his quarters. The royal knight led him down the long hallway, stopping in front of one of the guest rooms. He gestured toward the door, throwing a petty insult and calling Alan a straight-up slug. Lia completely snapped at Claude for the disrespect, firing back that his name was Alan and he was no slug. She warned him to lock that name in his memory, demanding to know if he had a personal problem or if he was just actively trying to get on her bad side. Caught off guard, Claude quickly tried to back down, offering a weak apology and claiming he just let his mouth get away from him. Lia just hissed right back, asking what he was even squeaking about now. Claude shifted his focus back to Alan, dropping a warning that, under strict royal orders, he'd be keeping a close eye on him. Alan was genuinely puzzled, questioning what he even meant by watching him. The knight clarified that he'd be posted up in the room directly opposite, meaning if Alan so much as thought about stepping outside, he'd better give him a heads up first. He threatened that any slip-up would go straight to the king's ears. He then threw one last jab, stating he was completely certain Alan would get crushed tomorrow, so he should probably enjoy his final night of rest. Leah didn't hesitate to back Alan up, declaring that he was going to take the easy win before childishly sticking her tongue out at the commander. She gave Claude a blunt goodnight and started heading into the room right alongside Alan. Claude stopped her in her tracks, completely bewildered. He questioned why on earth she was about to crash in the same room as this absolute bore, reminding her that her own luxury bedroom was located on the very top floor. The realization hit Leah instantly, leaving her completely flushed and embarrassed since she hadn't even given the sleeping arrangements a second thought. Claude was highly indignant, losing his mind as he questioned if this freak Alan regularly brought the princess to his room back at the academy. Leah yelled out that he had it completely wrong, and Alan quickly chimed in to confirm her words before things got out of hand. Blushing from the awkward mix-up, Leah asked Alan to walk her up to her actual quarters. After sharing a quick goodnight, she headed inside, leaving Alan to face the night alone. Alan sat by himself in the empty room, completely drained as he realized he was stuck in a vicious circle. It felt like his reputation was completely tanking by the day. He couldn't understand how a simple attempt to have a civilized chat with Leah's father had spiraled into this massive disaster. He threw himself onto the bed, completely exhausted and ready to call it a night, but a heavy wave of loneliness hit him out of nowhere. The sheer size of the room only made him feel more isolated. Back at the academy, Leah was always right by his side, making this sudden silence feel incredibly jarring. The gravity of the situation finally sank in. If he messed up tomorrow, he would lose his closest friend for good. But he refused to let things end like that. He still wanted to make memories with her back at school. Alan locked it in, deciding right then and there that losing simply wasn't an option for tomorrow's match. With his mind completely set on victory, he finally closed his eyes to get some well-deserved rest. However, he just couldn't get the sleep he was seeking and felt like swinging his sword to get some practice in. So, Alan got out of his room to get Claude's approval. He called out to Claude from outside his room, but Claude wouldn't respond. Alan noticed that the door was open, so he decided to go inside. Upon entering, he saw that Claude wasn't in the room and noticed that he was probably in the bath. Alan decided to wait for him to come out. Just then, Claude does walk out totally naked. But to Alan's surprise, Claude was actually a girl. Embarrassed, Claude went back inside the bathroom and yelled at Alan for entering her room without permission. She accuses him of trying to get into her bed just like he did with Leah. Alan denies. Claude questions if Alan really thought it'd be fine walking into a girl's room unceremoniously. Alan thought it'd be rude to tell Claude that he thought she was a guy, so he opted to apologize instead. Claude wouldn't have it though, and asked for Alan to atone for his sin. She offered him a dagger and told him to commit seppuku to make up for it. Alan was shocked, but Claude thought it's only fair to atone this way for seeing a pure girl's naked body without permission. She told him to be quick about it, but Alan didn't want to do it. He still had to win tomorrow for Leah's sake. So, Alan runs away from the room, leaving Claude fuming. Pissed off, Claude wondered just how much of a pervert Alan is for first coercing Leah into becoming his plaything, and now he was making a move on her. She promised to make him pay for it. The next morning, the grand arena of the kingdom was packed as spectators flooded the stands. Alan stood waiting by Claude's side, who bluntly told him he didn't have much time left before the match. The knight threw another jab, telling the perverted slug to hurry up and move. Alan could only think to himself that this hostile treatment was a direct hangover from last night's awkward incident. Claude led him into a side room, prompting Alan to ask where they even were. The knight explained that this was the official armory for the competitors. Under the strict rules of the main arena, bringing your own weapon was completely banned, meaning he'd have to pick from what was available. Alan took in the information, realizing this rule was probably put in place so that the raw quality of a blade wouldn't skew the outcome of the battle. Claude added that while every weapon in the room was top tier, none of them would actually save him from getting crushed. Instead of getting pissed off, Alan thanked her. He quickly realized that this might be his last shot to get her alone, so he needed to speak up right now. Calling out to Claude, Alan immediately tried to apologize for the massive misunderstanding from the previous night. Claude didn't let him finish. She grabbed his tie, yanking him into her personal space. She snapped that she didn't want his apology, reminding him that he had literally seen her naked, so he shouldn't think he was getting off the hook that easily. She ordered him to hurry up and choose a blade, stating she wanted to get back to the princess as soon as possible. Alan grabbed his sword, and Claude told him to fall in line and follow her. Walking away, Alan felt completely dejected that his apology had totally tanked. It was obvious that getting on her good side was going to be an uphill battle. She led him right up to the entrance of the main stage, telling him to walk out the moment his name was called. When she left him with a final wish to enjoy his suffering, Alan didn't back down. He locked eyes with her, asking if she really expected him to pay for his supposed bad behavior by losing. He told her those expectations were completely in vain, because today he was leaving this arena as the absolute winner. As the entrances began, Alan was introduced as the good-for-nothing seducer of the princess as he stepped foot onto the battlefield. The crowd immediately lost it and started to hurl insults at him. Alan took in all of the hostility, thinking about how this felt exactly like his days back at his old academy. Everyone had hated him there too, constantly laughing and praying for his downfall every single day. But right then, the silence was broken when Leah called out to him from the stands, loudly wishing him luck. Alan realized that everything was different now. He looked up at her, telling her to just sit back and rely on him. He wasn't fighting alone anymore. The crowd went silent in pure confusion. They couldn't understand why the princess was actively backing this guy up, whispering that he must be pressing on her weak spots to manipulate her. King Grievesteria turned to his daughter in pure indignation, demanding to know if she was seriously supporting the boy. Leah just gave her father an ice-cold look, firing back that it was her business and she'd support whoever she wanted. The announcer quickly shifted gears, introducing the fighters stepping out of the eastern gate. These two held the title of the absolute strongest in the realm, Gaulius the Strong and Rommel the Swift. Alan was completely caught off guard when he saw two opponents walking out. Up in the stands, Leah was just as confused. She demanded an explanation from her father, but Gree just grinned. He shrugged it off, stating he never once promised that this duel would be a one-on-one. The two champions sized Alan up and were visibly disappointed. Gaulius muttered that when the king ordered a 2-on-1 handicap match, he expected a real challenge, not some puny little swordsman. As they closed the distance, Alan looked at their massive builds and pointed out that they didn't look anywhere near his age. The two champions laughed it off, claiming they were so active that they hadn't even hit 20 yet, though they'd be turning 20 very soon. Alan openly doubted them, asking if they were seriously playing a joke on him right now. Gaulius warned him that he wouldn't normally double-team a weak kid like him. But since Alan had dared to deceive their princess, this wasn't going to be a fair fight. It was strictly going to be an execution. Alan didn't let the trash talk get to him. He shrugged and told them they could say whatever they wanted, because he was going to walk out of here a winner and take Leah back with him. With the tension at an absolute peak, the start of the first duel was officially announced. Alan launched himself forward, thinking to himself that the ultimate advantage always belongs to the one who strikes first. He closed the distance with such blinding speed that Gaulius the Strong was completely thrown off, panicking internally as he tried to comprehend the unreal power heading his way. Before Gaulius could even react, Rommel the Swift tried to cut Alan off by unleashing the autumn wind blowing style. Alan didn't even flinch, cleanly dodging the incoming strike. He recognized that while Rommel's physical conditioning was top tier, the man simply couldn't keep up with his raw speed. Alan moved so fast it completely shattered his opponent's confidence, leaving Rommel wondering how his attack had just missed entirely, while Gaulius questioned what kind of absolute monster they were actually dealing with. The entire arena went silent as the next few seconds turned into a complete blur. By the time the dust settled, the spectators were left staring in sheer disbelief at the sight of their two strongest champions completely flattened on the dirt. Alan had dismantled the kingdom's elite pairing in the blink of an eye, finishing the job with a single decisive blow. Down on the field, Alan locked his focus, driven entirely by the fact that he loved his daily life back at the academy with Leah and refused to let anyone tear them apart. Up in the royal box, King Grievesteria was absolutely furious at the outcome. Alan looked up and offered a polite apology, simply stating that today he just happened to be a little bit stronger. Refusing to accept defeat, Gree loudly called for Claude, ordering his elite commander to step into the arena immediately. When Claude Stroganov stepped out onto the sands, she looked at Alan and admitted she was genuinely surprised that she actually had to be his final opponent. The announcer hyped up her arrival, introducing her as the commander of the princess's bodyguard squad and the final trump card of the entire special match. The entire realm's honor was now riding on her shoulders. Alan gripped his sword, recognizing that the real challenge had finally arrived. Watching from the stands, Leah was biting her lip in pure worry for her friend, knowing exactly how dangerous Claude truly was. Claude's body was coiled tight like a steel string, her physical strength was immense, and her sword skills were honed to absolute perfection. Unable to just sit by and watch silently anymore, Leah jumped up from her seat and screamed across the stadium, telling Alan that she believed in him and wishing him luck. Hearing her voice touched Alan deeply, locking in his determination. Claude scoffed at the display, claiming Alan must be enjoying himself thoroughly by manipulating the princess like this. She accused him of humiliating Leah and deceiving the entire royal family, declaring that his only true atonement would be death once she exposed his ugly, monstrous nature. The announcer called for the final round to begin, and the two immediately clashed. Claude opened up with the aggressive Supreme King style, executing a massive heavy strike. Alan instantly recognized the forms, noting that her style was identical to Leah's. He cleanly parried and slipped past her heavy blows, provoking Claude to yell that he better not underestimate her. She pivoted to deliver what should have been a crushing finishing blow, but Alan countered beautifully, leaping high into the air. Even Claude had to mentally respect how skillfully he executed the evasion. Alan wasn't even aiming for a specific opening. He was simply dismantling the trajectory of her strikes. Claude noticed his defensive reflexes were completely off the charts, though she told herself it wouldn't matter once she turned up her speed. Alan watched her next movements with genuine admiration. Her combination of skills was flawless, with zero wasted motion from her foot placement all the way to the tip of her blade. It was pure grace and high-tier skill. Claude transitioned seamlessly into a style of dominance and destruction, but Alan stood his ground, successfully repelling every single assault. He could feel the sheer weight behind her swings, realizing she must have survived the most brutal training imaginable. But Alan knew a thing or two about brutal training himself. As the girl pressed the attack with even more fury, Alan pulled out a trick that completely broke her rhythm. He vanished right out of her line of sight, leaving her frantically wondering where he went, before executing a sudden reappearance. He instantly chained together the cherry blossom one-handed sword style directly into a devastating cherry blossom mirror slash. Claude had no choice but to throw herself into a desperate defensive guard. The spectators gasped in shock, unable to believe that their legendary commander was being forced onto the retreat. They began to realize this boy was far more than just a smooth talker. King Gree grumbled at the crowd's shifting energy, barking at the spectators for making a massive fuss over a standard warm-up. He claimed this initial exchange was just to measure the boy's baseline, and that the real duel for the title of a true swordsman was about to begin. He knew Claude wouldn't let him down. Backing away to reset her stance, Claude reluctantly admitted that she had to respect his talent, confessing he was an excellent swordsman. Alan asked her if she really hated him that much. Claude replied that having guided and trained countless warriors, she could see right through him. She pointed out that while his physical output didn't make sense for a normal human, his actual swordsmanship was what truly surpassed the elite. She questioned if he had secretly gone through decades of hellish training to reach this level. In his head, Alan amended that number to a few million years, but he simply thanked her for her honesty. Claude put some distance between them, dropping her final evaluation. She claimed Alan was clearly burning through his absolute maximum output just to stay in the fight, and that it was pitiful because he would never be able to achieve anything higher than his current state. Telling him these were her parting words, she faced him fully, gathering her inner energy. She yelled at him to look closely, declaring that she was about to show him the true meaning of unachievable talent by showcasing her soul attire. Claude resolved that she would never let anyone harm the princess, as Leah was her entire guide in life. She recalled how when they were kids, she was the weak crybaby and Leah was the strong one. Leah's confidence back then in wanting to protect the kingdom touched Claude. She wanted to grow strong herself and protect Leah for how precious she was. Alan analyzed the situation, realizing that her combination of a long sword and bird control meant she would dominate at a distance. His only option was to force close combat. Claude read his mind instantly, laughing off the strategy as she launched an air owl straight at him. Alan noted the extreme velocity but successfully parried the bird's trajectory. Turning up the heat, Claude triggered a massive explosion right in front of him. The thick smoke completely blinded Alan, throwing him into a critical situation, while Claude immediately followed up with an aggressive dominance-style strike. Alan relied on his pure defensive reflexes to dodge, countering with the second sword of the hazy moon to cleanly repel the onslaught. Claude smiled, calling him a smart guy for setting up a counterattack in advance, but Alan corrected her, stating he was just a strong guy. Alan kept his eyes locked on her movements, realizing her troublesome soul dress allowed her to turn controlled objects into detonation points. However, he picked up on a vital limitation. She could only manage 3 objects at a time. Claude immediately broke his theory by increasing the number of constructs. Alan watched the swarm multiply, wondering if she was seriously kidding him as he realized these things couldn't be cut directly. Claude declared it was time to dance, unleashing a relentless chain of explosions. Alan felt like he had never dodged so much in his entire life, literally dancing through the dirt to escape the blast zones. He tried to organize a counterattack, but the sheer volume of the explosions left him with zero time to breathe. Claude told him not to even bother, transitioning into another fierce style. A massive detonation went off right next to him, forcing Alan to balance the intense shockwave using his flying shadow technique. As the smoke began to thin, Claude assumed the battle was already decided. She pointed out that his lack of a soul dress made his efforts completely meaningless, declaring him entirely unfit to be the princess's protector. She openly told him to just give up. Alan knew she wasn't wrong. He couldn't win a prolonged exchange this way, and the situation was quickly spiraling out of control. He took in all of this information and realized he had only one desperate option left. He had to intentionally take a hit to close the distance. Since she was wielding a long sword, gaining even a split second of close proximity would put him in the clear. Confident that his body could endure the brunt of the shockwave, Alan locked it in, knowing that victory meant finally returning home with Leah. Alan dropped low, bending his posture to withstand the incoming concussive wave. Claude shouted that he was acting completely desperate, calling him a stupid boy as he began to aggressively break through her air forces. Alan charged forward through the crossfire. Only the main owl construct was left standing between him and his target. Suddenly, a massive explosion erupted right on top of him, throwing the entire arena into silence. The spectators panicked, assuming the direct hit had completely finished him off. Even Claude felt a twinge of regret, muttering that the stupid boy should have just surrendered. Out of nowhere, Alan burst through the smoke. He executed the 8th sword, Yatagarasu, instantly appearing in front of her face and locking his blade against hers. Completely stunned, Claude demanded to know if he was immortal. Alan gasped out a no, stating he could feel every bit of the pain. Claude tried to break the deadlock to regain her ranged advantage, but Alan kept her pinned. Furious, she resolved to end it in a single second, unleashing the 5th sword to break his guard. She smiled, asking if he truly thought she couldn't handle close combat, before detonating a blinding flash of light directly in his eyes. Blinded and unable to see his opponent's position, Alan heard Claude tell him not to take it personally as she delivered her decisive finishing blow. Up on the balcony, Leah jumped to her feet, covering her mouth to suppress a scream out of absolute terror for his life. When the smoke finally cleared, the crowd saw Alan crouched on the ground. He examined his wound, noting with relief that it was mostly superficial. He muttered to himself that she was genuinely trying to end him, realizing he had gotten incredibly lucky. Claude lost her temper completely upon seeing him stand back up. She furiously asked if he regularly ate metal for breakfast, but Alan just calmly asked what she was talking about since humans obviously don't eat metal. Claude kept raging, utterly baffled by his unnatural invulnerability and how he was even standing after taking her owl head-on without a soul dress. She openly questioned if he was even human. Alan locked eyes with her, stating it was finally his turn to go on the offensive. Refusing to back down, Claude summoned her air army once again, ordering them to completely destroy him. The birds rained down in a barrage of detonations, but Alan's body had already adapted to the rhythm of the impact, or perhaps her output was beginning to weaken. Either way, Alan recognized this was the one window of opportunity he couldn't afford to miss. Claude felt panic setting in as her explosions proved completely useless. Forcing herself to calm down, she decided to rely strictly on her elite swordsmanship to finish the job. Their blades clashed in a furious exchange, and Alan mentally noted the massive strength behind her arms. But simple strength wasn't the issue. A second later, following a heavy collision, Alan looked down in absolute shock as his sword completely crumbled to pieces. He was stunned, wondering if the structural failure was part of her soul dress or if the provided weapons had been defective from the very start. Up in the royal box, King Gree burst into a loud laugh. He mocked Alan for just now noticing the trap, reminding the boy that he had already warned him victory was impossible. Alan looked up at the king with pure disdain, muttering that it was a total shame for a ruler to stoop to such a dishonest trick. The announcer quickly broadcasted the update, shouting that Alan's blade had shattered from a single blow and questioning if this officially signaled the end of the match. Claude looked at Alan and clarified that she had no part in the sabotage. It was entirely the king's doing, as every weapon in the armory had been pre-damaged. She added that while she didn't want to win this way, her entire existence was dedicated to serving the princess, meaning she would gladly cut down an unarmed opponent for Leah's sake. The crowd, completely won over by Alan's insane bravery, began cheering for him to hold his head high and just give up before he made a fatal mistake. They shouted that it was the greatest fight of the year and begged him not to do something stupid that would get him finished. Alan listened to the shouts of the spectators, then looked back at Claude. He pointed out how strange it was that she suddenly cared so much about his safety, asking if she honestly believed a broken sword would make him throw in the towel. He knew stepping forward now was completely reckless, but an easy fight was something he had never experienced. Without raw talent, his entire path had always been driven purely by his own stubborn emotions. Up on the balcony, Leah was crying from pure fear. She mentally begged him to stop, unable to watch an unarmed suicide attempt. Alan looked straight up at Leah, shouting across the arena that he wanted to stay by her side forever so they could continue to grow stronger together. He loudly demanded to know what she wanted. Leah screamed back through her tears, declaring that she wanted to be by his side too, so they could always stay together. Inspired by her words, Alan shouted his gratitude up to the stands. He turned back to Claude, telling her that the match wasn't over. He declared that he was going to defeat her, free the princess, and do it all with his bare hands. Claude went quiet, taking in his words. She looked at him deeply before bowing to his sheer courage, loudly declaring to the entire stadium that she officially recognized him as a true swordsman. She stated that his absolute will aroused pure pride, meaning she would meet his charge with everything she had. The two rushed at each other for the final clash. Claude unleashed the dominant style dragon roar alongside her remaining air forces. Alan recognized it was another ranged barrage, meaning his only choice was to speed up faster than ever before. Claude frantically ordered her constructs to tear him to pieces, but Alan charged straight through the explosions, literally clearing a path with his bare hands. Right as he was about to make contact, a massive detonation went off between them. Alan stopped in his tracks, completely bewildered as the smoke cleared. He looked at her and asked why on earth she had just blown herself up. Claude paused for a moment, then calmly replied that she was giving up the fight. She declared that he had won. Leah rejoiced while King Gree turned completely furious, unable to comprehend how this disaster had just happened. And just like that, Alan Rodal was declared the winner.